The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Auckland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callaghan. Bradford James Joseph Callaghan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted. but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Auckland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callaghan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events, but did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callaghan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callaghan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callaghan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Auckland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callaghan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callaghan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callaghan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callaghan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callaghan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Venning sentenced Brad Callaghan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callaghan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Venning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callaghan to justice. Mr. Callaghan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callaghan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callaghan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callaghan's attorney Stuart Grieve said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing. We are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callaghan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. He called her name menacingly, and she stopped to examine the unfamiliar silhouette in the darkness. The stranger quickly approached her and grabbed her. She squealed loudly, but a sharp pain knocked her off her feet and the girl fell. The disappearance of people is not an uncommon phenomenon. We live in a disturbing world in which all sorts of things happen to people. Sometimes they disappear through their own fault or through the fault of an intruder. There are many mysterious and unsolved cases of missing citizens all over the world. Analyzing missing persons reports and reviewing police reports shows that the number of disappearance cases has multiplied in 2 decades. Today, let's talk about a case that is still considered one of the worst injustices in the history of the Spanish judicial system, because decades later, Spain cannot forget the story that took place on the Costa del Sol. This story has everything: love, disappearance, blood, and cruel injustice, which will definitely be corrected, but at a very high cost, which for many years will be remembered not only by Spaniards, but also by the whole world. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born December 2, 1952 in the rural province of Jaén in the municipality of Arroyo de los Llancos, Spain. At the age of 24, Alicia fell in love and married a Dutch citizen, Willem Waninkoff. Soon the family had their firstborn son Guillermo, then a daughter Rosa, then another daughter Rocio. With the appearance of children, the relationship between the spouses became quite tense. Willem became addicted to drinking, and because of the long absences, and lost his job. At the peak of loud arguments, Willem raised his voice at Alicia and could even hit. In order to provide for her family, Alicia had to take a job as a maid in a hotel in Ibiza. It was during this difficult period of her life that Alicia met Dolores Vasquez, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Maria Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia, Spain, who had settled in the UK. She had a good education and was well-mannered and an interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between the two women, which later developed into a love relationship. A year after the beginning of the relationship with Dolores, Alicia dared to leave her husband and officially formalize the divorce. Willem returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon the women in love bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia received full custody of the 3 children and raised them with Dolores. After her parents divorced in 1983, Rocio and her sister Rosa looked up to Dolores as a second mother and proudly signed Vasquez Hornos. All 3 of Alicia's children adored Dolores. The 5 of them lived in complete love and understanding as a true family. In 1988, the women decided to break off their love relationship, but continued to live together as good friends until 1994. After 11 years together, they finally broke up and Alicia started dating another man, Juan Charillo. Alicia moved into a new home and fully immersed herself in a new romantic relationship. Life for her was filled with new colors and love. Because the children grew up, the beloved man was always near. But at one point, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. On the morning of October 10th, 1999, Alicia did not find her daughter Rocio at home. At first, Alicia wasn't worried, believing her daughter might have spent the night at her boyfriend's or one of her friends' houses. But when she didn't return home later, Alicia became concerned. The family contacted Rocio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to get reassuring information about their daughter's whereabouts, but no one had seen her. On September 9th, Rocio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. On that day, she was going with her boyfriend Antonio and her friends to go to a fair in Fuengirola. The girl's house was in the neighborhood of La Cortiera, very close to Antonio's house. Rocio stayed at his house until 10:30 in the evening and decided to return home for a short while to shower and change clothes before meeting her boyfriend and friends at the fair. She never made it home. Even though Alicia was already worried, she decided to take a walk with Juan to calm down rather than immediately report her daughter's disappearance to the police. As they were walking down the street, the woman saw a large blood stain on the road, as if some animal had been killed. She told Juan about it. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, but when they got closer, Alicia saw sneakers with drops of blood. They were her daughter's sneakers. From Alicia Hornos's recollection, I got closer and saw my daughter's sneakers. I said, "Those are Rocio's sneakers," and he said, "No way." I said, "No, those are my daughter's sneakers." I was hysterical. I said, "Call the police, those are her sneakers." During that walk, In addition to the sneakers, a napkin and several bloodstains were found in a vacant lot next to the road Rocio usually walked on. Alicia called the police. Immediately, a missing girl report was filed with a full description. Long hair, brown eyes, wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. After the officially announced search activities, the forensic investigator reported the need to conduct a forensic examination at the alleged crime scene to find out whose blood was on the road and sneakers. After examining the scene, the first assumptions were the version of an assault or a fight in which someone was injured. But the further investigators followed the trail, the more they found blood stains, and even long chains of stains that looked like drag marks. That means someone was moving very fast, maybe even running. Then the blood traces disappeared, and then the search team noticed a very large stain indicating significant blood loss. They found more and more bloody footprints similar to the drag marks of a bloody body. These tracks led to car tire prints, after which the blood traces disappeared. A cigarette butt, the brand of which was not common in Spain, was found next to the tread marks. Forensics collected all the samples that could help in any way during the investigation, and DNA from the samples was supposed to help find whoever was at the scene. Based on this data, a thorough investigation was conducted. Along with the investigation and the identification of the blood taken from the traces found, the search for the girl continued. But the investigators were almost certain that Rocio Waninkoff had been murdered. After all, the blood trail started from the sidewalk and continued to a pool of blood large enough to cause her death from volumetric blood loss. Next to the pool were drag marks, and intersecting them and the blood were tire tracks left by a small car with a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Because the drag marks continued across a heavily sloped area that would have made it difficult for one person to drag the body alone, it was believed that the body was dragged by at least two people and then left in a less open area of the vacant lot before a vehicle pulled up to transport the body. But the search did not stop. Volunteers scoured the area on foot, on motorcycles, up hills. Everyone wanted to find Rocio, but at the same time, they were afraid to find her dead. It was very hard for everyone. There were flyers with Rocio's picture everywhere. All the news channels reported about her disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists, because as long as Rocio was being talked about, she would not be forgotten. Journalists from all TV channels were on duty at Rocio Vaninkoff's house. Everyone wanted the girl to come home, to find her. Time passed, but the search did not yield any results. A few days after Rocio's disappearance, a local cab driver showed up at the police station and said that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., he dodged an SUV that was speeding in the oncoming lane of traffic in the area where the girl's sneakers were found on the curb. He added that he heard a piercing scream as he passed the vehicle. There was no doubt, Rocio had been kidnapped and killed by an unknown assailant. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood on the road belonged to Rocio Vaninkoff. The family was at a loss for words. These feelings were spreading fast. They were felt not only by the girl's family and friends, but by the whole of Spain. On November 2nd, 1999, 25 days after Rocio's disappearance, a disfigured body, possibly Rocio's, was found near the Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially covered with bushes and fallen leaves, and was hidden behind a hedge separating a housing development that was quite close to the highway. It was a narrow path that could hardly be traveled by car. The girl was searched for within the confines of her home, and she was found in another town. When the police arrived at the place, they found the body very badly decomposed. During the evidence collection, large black garbage bags were found containing the girl's clothes. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, indicating that the bags had not been purchased specifically for the transportation of the body, but had only been reused. Upon discovering the clothes, investigators concluded that the clothes could have belonged to the missing Rocio Waninkoff. The missing person's sister, Rosa, recognized several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items found in 2 garbage bags near the body as belonging to Rocio. The t-shirts were torn from stab wounds, and clothing below the waist was never found. The remains of the body were taken to the lab for forensic analysis. 6 forensic experts worked slowly and meticulously all night, using all their knowledge and skills. They had a difficult job ahead of them because the body was badly decomposed. Decomposition is much faster in rain and heat when there is a certain amount of humidity. Not a single organ was preserved, only the bones were intact. The goal was to find something else that could help the investigation and tell us how the attack took place. As a result, numerous close wounds were found, and there were 8 stab wounds on his back caused by a weapon with a single-sided blade. According to experts, the attack was very fast and brutal. Most likely the victim was immobilized or did not have time to react. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags that were found where the body was found. Police already had fingerprints and tire prints from the car. They also found 2 tissue samples on Rocio Waninkoff's body. At that point, there was still too little evidence that would lead to the arrest of a specific suspect. But the investigation had some evidence, data, and leads that the civil guard was looking into. The public pressure had an undue influence, and the investigators were just bound to find something, but they did not. Because Raucio's body was badly decomposed, it was impossible to establish basic details, such as whether the girl had been sexually assaulted. Investigators came to one conclusion when they saw a corpse with its legs spread apart. Since the victim's legs were spread too wide, they thought it was staged. That is, the perpetrator made it look like violence. So they ruled out the motive of sexual assault and subsequent murder, and focused on a crime motivated by revenge and hatred. It was a very emotional attack, which meant that the girl could have been attacked by someone very close to her, who may have been very upset with her. With the evidence and facts gathered, the investigators conducted follow-up interviews. First of all, the investigators questioned her boyfriend, Antonio Hirata. He was the last person to see Rocio alive, and he was the one she was supposed to meet again that night. But the guy had an alibi because he just fell asleep at home and did not go to the fair that day. All of Rocio's relatives and friends were questioned, but they all had solid alibis. A year after Rocio Waninkoff's death, the civil guard was able to narrow down the number of suspects, and by the end of the year they found a suspect who, in the opinion of the investigation, all the signs pointed to. That person turned out to be Dolores Vasquez. There was absolutely no evidence against Dolores, but thanks to the media, everyone began to believe this woman was guilty. Dolores Vasquez was a close friend of Alicia's. As it often happens, journalists distorted and even invented information. Allegedly, Alicia from the very first day accused Dolores in the death of her daughter. But at the time of the crime, their relationship had already ended 4 years ago. The investigation actively went after the public. The investigation focused entirely on Dolores, and now there was a motive in the case. A young girl could be a hindrance, or otherwise interfere with the romantic relationship between the 2 women. Everyone said that if it hadn't been for Rocio, maybe Alicia would have gone back to Dolores. It was Dolores' way of getting back at Alicia for not wanting to go back to her. That's what people said. In the eyes of the press and the public, Dolores Vasquez was guilty from the moment she was arrested. Even though the woman did not confess to anything, residents were convinced of her guilt mainly because the police believed that someone close to her was the killer. Family members claimed that Dolores was an aggressive and violent woman who was also very jealous. Alicia told reporters that Dolores was a vindictive and cruel person. The public condemned Dolores. The fact that Dolores Vasquez was non-traditional was a reason to attack her during the trial. This was not the norm in Spain. A sarcastic, aggressive, calculating, cold-blooded woman. The character was beginning to take shape. A vicious, heartless woman. A woman who bided her time for 4 years, finally coming up with a crime plan out of hatred. The audience cheered, having independently created the image of a calculating villainess for Dolores. The trial turned into an entertainment. People watched the trial only because they had nothing better to do. A huge number of people gathered outside the courthouse. People wanted to get into the courthouse to follow the trial and not miss a second. Journalists were all over the news that a close family friend had been charged with the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. Dolores Vasquez was the kind of woman no one liked. Therefore, she had virtually no chance at trial. She wasn't friendly or nice, But how many people are there in the world who are not sociable and friendly with everyone? We don't call them all criminals because they don't smile at us when we meet them, do we? In this case, the battle was fought not only in the courthouse, but also on the streets where the public was involved. All of the information, especially the rumors that the media blew up, could not help but influence the opinion of the jury. After all the TV stations, almost all the TV shows were saying that Dolores Vasquez was the one responsible for Rocio's death, as well as all the information that the reporters were distorting. So a lie told 1,000 times became the truth for Dolores. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence against Dolores Vasquez, but apparently justice just decided that someone should be in jail for it, and chose a victim who had a dubious alibi, as well as a bunch of flaws that automatically made her a scapegoat. Dolores wasn't seen at the scene. The tire tracks didn't match the car she drove. The fabric fibers found didn't match Vasquez's clothes. Nor did the fingerprints found on the trash bags at the scene. And she also had an alibi. She claimed that she was babysitting her sick mother that day while watching her little niece. But this was disregarded. More than 50 people were called to court to testify. Only once did Dolores take the stand. "I didn't kill Rocio. I didn't even see her that day. All I'm asking all of Spain, is to find who did it, because it wasn't me. And whoever did it is still out there. Maybe even among you in the courtroom. There has never been any evidence against me, and there never will be, because I am innocent." Spain has a very poor judicial system that often oversteps the law. Spanish prosecutors and investigating judges are ready to step over the law and human fate to prove their theories. Absolute disregard for the law. There was no physical evidence, so the Civil Guard report described only the circumstantial evidence that pointed to Dolores Vasquez and profiled her psychologically. The jury majority found defendant Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder. She was sentenced to a 16-year prison term. The public rejoiced. Rocio's funeral was very well attended. Journalists were constantly filming despite other people's grief. At that moment, all of Rocio's relatives and all the people in the town lived in fear. This fear fueled the many television programs that covered the details of the case. After Dolores' arrest, the victim's family went from one television program to another, pulling out old stories that confirmed Vasquez's cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel character. It took years and another similar crime to make it clear that Rocio Vanenkov was not at all as the public and the press had fantasized. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. They had already called her friends, but they said that they had walked her friend to the door of her house. But Sonia wasn't home. In the street, 3 doors down from her house, right next to a tree, her parents found her shoes, purse, and phone. There were traces of blood on the cars parked nearby. Sound familiar? But if the suspect has been in jail for almost a year and a half, did the police make a mistake and have an innocently convicted person in jail? Authorities immediately began searching for and investigating the coin incident. Time passed, and despair increasingly gripped the family. There were searches in the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left no hope for a favorable outcome. One of the main pieces of evidence in Sonia's case was a car headlight. The officers of the Civil Guard made inquiries to all the car repair shops in search of a car with a broken headlight that matched the description. There were a variety of different theories of the attack. Among them were chains of rape and other similar crimes to the disappearance of the girl in Motril. But the important fact remained that Rocio and Sonia had disappeared during the fair. All employees of the fair who worked in Motril and Coin were checked. Just as in the case of Rocio, flyers with Sonia's image were posted everywhere. So many people were involved in the search for her. They were very active in helping the police, not only by donating their time, but also by providing any assistance needed for the search. In addition to these searches, the Civil Guard also continued their investigation. The main objective was to find the girl alive, but on the 5th day after her disappearance, with the help of search dogs, Sonia's body was found near Coin. It was found in a creek under a pile of rocks. It had rained heavily the night before, washing away any trace that might have helped the police in locating the culprit. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia was at a fair in Coin. She said goodbye to friends near her home. It was there that she was attacked. The perpetrator hit her several times, which made Sonia partially unconscious, and she was unable to fight back because the attack was sudden and violent. The perpetrator then took her away in a car to a remote location away from her home. Both internal and external injuries were inflicted, and then the girl was strangled, which was the cause of death. Due to the fact that Sonia was found very quickly, it was possible to collect all the evidence and analyze the results of the forensic examination. Colonel Pacagabella reported that important evidence was indeed found on the body of Sonia Carabantes. The biological material was analyzed and then entered into the police criminal DNA database, where the much-anticipated matches were obtained with the genetic material found on the cigarette butt that was found at the crime scene in the Rocio Waninkoff case. When the two DNA samples were compared, they were found to be identical to each other. The man who killed Rocio in 1999 and the man who attacked Sonia turned out to be the same person. The news was incredible. Dolores Vasquez, who had been condemned without exaggeration by the whole of Spain, turned out to be innocent, while the real culprit walked free and took the life of another young girl. The puzzle is complete. An English brand cigarette butt and skin particles under the victim's fingernails. The DNA from both pieces of evidence belonged to the same person. After that, events began to unfold very quickly. On September 18th, a young woman, Cecilia Pantoja, contacted the police and said she suspected her ex-husband when she saw bloodstains on his t-shirt, just days after Sonia's body was found. She said her husband was also absent from home twice, traveling somewhere in a car on the day of the Rocio attack. Through DNA testing and the woman's testimony, police were able to identify the real killer of Rocio and Sonia. The perpetrator's name was Tony King, and he was well known in Britain as the Holloway Strangler. Tony Alexander King's crime wave began when he was still a teenager in the Holloway neighborhood of North London. In 1985, the neighborhood was the scene of a series of attacks on women in which the victims were strangled and abused. At the time, King went by his birth name, Anthony Bromwich. 5 weeks later, he was finally caught and convicted at the age of 19 for strangling 5 women to unconsciousness with a rope or cable and then abusing them. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for committing the crimes because of his own inadequacy. He served only half of his sentence and was paroled in 1991, but returned to prison a few weeks later for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. In search of a new life, he changed his name to Tony King, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to live a normal family life. Their marriage produced a daughter, but King soon returned to his old habits. The police in Spain realized that they were on the right track. Tony King was put under 24-hour surveillance, and a month after Sonia's death he was arrested. Under questioning, Tony King confessed to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he said he followed Rocio as she entered a busy street on her way home from her boyfriend's house and held a razor to her neck. When she tried to free herself from her attacker, the razor stabbed into Rocio's neck. The monster panicked and stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the kidnapping, violence, and murder of Sonia Carabantes. The court ordered him to pay the victim's family the equivalent of about $350,000. He also received an additional 7 years for attempted violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, he was also found guilty of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before his trial, King sent letters to Sonia and Rocio's mothers asking for forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mancha Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real in Spain. After the case was closed, a major scandal erupted in Spain over the fact that an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. We are accustomed to imagining that miscarriages of justice brought to light bring shame to those involved and monetary costs to the state. But this is not the case in Spain. It is difficult to accept and realize, but in the 21st century, not only police and courts can brutally punish an innocent person, but even society may well trample a man into the mud, and even if he manages to prove his case, absolutely no one will apologize. It took more than a year before it became clear that Dolores Vasquez was telling the truth when she dryly and unemotionally repeated that she was innocent. What all of Spain had taken for cruelty and insensitivity turned out to be simply the personality traits of a woman. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vasquez 120,000 euros in compensation, which was less than the 4 million euros that Dolores had originally demanded. But no one ever apologized to Dolores for the way she was treated. Dolores Vasquez, whose parents moved to Spain from Epsom, returned to the UK after she was released from prison. More than 20 years have passed, but Dolores has still not received an apology for the way she was treated, nor has she received any compensation since the case was closed. In 2014, she was working for a transport company in East London and underwent a psychological evaluation after her ordeal. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after years of anxiety, when she found it difficult to talk to people and find work for the years of fear and humiliation she lived in. The Dolores Vasquez imprisonment case is considered one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Spain's judicial history since 1910. Criminals easily get away with it, even if they are stupid enough to leave their DNA behind, simply because they cross the country's border. The police rush to pin the case on at least one person without going into detail. The press hypes up scandals and digs into the dirty laundry of not only the perpetrators, but also the victims. Society easily labels and considers it normal to put someone in jail just because they dislike that person. It is a pity that such truth is true for absolutely all countries of the world. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanksgiving is a traditional family holiday. During this time, multiple generations gather around a festive table in the home of the elders. Each person present is expected to express gratitude for the blessings of the past year and to show love and respect for their relatives. This is how it goes for most families. However, there are those who disregard these established customs. In such relationships, things often leave much to be desired, and even significant dates hold little meaning. For domestic violence, there are no restraining factors. The boundaries of what is acceptable have long been broken. This is a new story about the horrific events that took place in one American family on the eve of a national holiday. Call for help. On November 23, 2006, at 3:46 p.m., a call was made to the Memphis, Tennessee Emergency Services. It's understood that misfortunes don't take holidays or weekends, so it can't be said that the atmosphere at 911 was relaxed. However, the dispatcher who took the call was in shock, as he later admitted to a colleague. What startled the operator was the absolute calmness of the caller, as if he wasn't asking for help but placing a breakfast order. The man identified himself as Jeffrey Scott and reported that his wife had been unconscious since 11 a.m. At the same time, a voice in the background corrected him, saying that the woman was most likely dead. When the dispatcher asked for clarification, Scott stated, "She was breathing a second ago and now she's dead." His voice didn't waver. Information about a possible crime was immediately relayed to the rescue service leadership, and a specialized team was dispatched to the scene. The victim. Law enforcement arrived at the address within minutes. They were met by the homeowner, who led them to the bedroom where his wife, Ashley Scott, lay. Upon entering the room, they saw someone bending over her, performing CPR. The man introduced himself as Dr. Robert McGee, a friend of Jeffrey. He said the woman was still alive, but on the brink of death. Her pulse was barely detectable, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. Medics examined the woman and agreed with his assessment. They suspected that she had sustained a head injury from a blunt object and was close to death. Her pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light, and blood was coming from her mouth and nose. Additionally, Ashley's body showed signs of trauma. Her legs, chest, and back bore numerous bruises and abrasions. The medical team attempted emergency resuscitation. They intubated her, used a defibrillator, and administered heart-stimulating drugs, but none of it helped. The young woman was dying before their eyes. In the end, she was rushed to the hospital. A neurosurgeon was called to assess her condition in the emergency department. His diagnosis was grim and confirmed his colleagues' opinions. The 28-year-old woman was in a critical state, at the final stage of brain death. There was nothing that could be done to help her. Her body systems and vital organs were shutting down. As a result, it was decided not to prolong the patient's suffering and to disconnect her from life support. She passed away shortly after. There was no doubt that Ashley had been brutally deprived of life. Her right ear was green, a color typical of those who box and take repeated blows to the same spot. Additionally, a man's shoe print was visible on her back. It seemed as though someone had trampled, if not jumped, on her. Her fragile body was covered in bruises at various stages of healing, indicating that she had been subjected to periodic violence. Family doctor. While doctors fought for the life of a young and beautiful woman, police officers were questioning McGee and Scott. The doctor explained that he was the one who insisted on calling emergency services and shared what he knew. At 2:30 p.m., Jeffrey, his friend, called him. The men had met during their college years and occasionally kept in touch. Over the phone, Jeffrey mentioned that he had been drinking with his wife the night before, and afterward she felt unwell. She went to bed, but never woke up. He then decided to seek professional help. At the time, the doctor was busy but postponed his duties and arrived at the couple's home. There, he found Jeffrey next to his wife, who showed no signs of life. The doctor suspected that the couple had quarreled and something unfortunate had occurred, which they wanted to keep quiet about. That's why they contacted him. He knew that the couple had been going through tough times recently. Each reacted differently. Ashley drank, and Jeffrey was quick to anger and often raised his hand against her. When the doctor examined Ashley, he realized that the situation was far more severe than he had initially thought. There was no chance of survival, and the poor woman needed immediate medical attention. He insisted that Jeffrey call 911. At the same time, Robert pieced together the situation in his mind. He understood that something much more serious had happened, possibly a premeditated crime. He admitted to the police that he had deliberately delayed Scott at the scene to prevent him from fleeing. Jeffrey's lies. Throughout this, Jeffrey remained utterly emotionless. It seemed as though he had no concern for the future of the woman he once loved. When asked by the police what had happened, he explained that the previous evening they had argued. The reason was the discovery of Ashley's messages with another man. He believed his wife was cheating on him. Unable to bear the betrayal, he struck her, but only once. After that, she stumbled and fell, as she was heavily intoxicated. Jeffrey noted that his wife frequently abused alcohol and behaved irrationally. He didn't want to tolerate her outbursts anymore and kicked her out of the house. In such instances, she would usually sleep in the garage. In the morning, he found his wife there, still asleep. Feeling pity, Jeffrey carried her into the house and laid her on the bed. Time passed, but she didn't wake up. That's when he realized something was wrong and tried to revive her himself. Then he contacted his doctor friend and called him to the house. However, the police didn't believe his story. When they arrived, the woman was covered in bruises from head to toe. She was bleeding, with her face and head battered. Even if she had been drunk and fallen, she wouldn't have caused such injuries to herself. It was clear she had been beaten. Scott was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. As soon as the autopsy results came in, the charge was upgraded to first-degree crime. Autopsy results. The pathologist's report was chilling. The cause of Ashley Scott's death was a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain. Such injuries are caused by a severe blow to the head. Her brain essentially slammed against her skull, leading to massive bleeding and swelling, cutting off the oxygen supply. This caused her body systems and organs to begin failing. It's an excruciating process. What's even more tragic is that she could have been saved if help had been provided in time, preferably within the first few hours. Additionally, more than 50 hematomas were found on her body. They varied in color and density, confirming the medic's statements that the woman had been repeatedly assaulted. It was hard to imagine the torment Ashley had endured over time. The most horrifying aspect was that the person who inflicted this suffering was the one who was supposed to protect her. Evidence. After Jeffrey's arrest, detectives began examining the crime scene. Signs of a struggle were found throughout the house. Items were scattered everywhere, and furniture was overturned. A broken vase lay in the living room. On the kitchen table, near a laptop, were printed messages between Ashley and her lover, confirming the suspect's claims about the motive for the crime. Upon closer inspection of the garage, officers found bloodstains on the floor. Inside Mrs. Scott's car were women's clothes and other personal items. There was also a handbag containing her documents and passport. It appeared that the deceased had planned to escape, but she didn't make it. Officers then decided to speak with the family's relatives and friends, which revealed unexpected details about their lives and circumstances, shedding light on the incident. Unfortunately, it happens that women fall in love with the wrong men and tie their lives to them. Initially, everything seems bright and promising, but soon the object of their affection turns into a dreadful tyrant, and life with them becomes a nightmare. The victim of both emotional and physical abuse loses their sense of reality and may even justify the abuser's actions. In these cases, outside psychological help is needed, as the victim is often unable to help themselves or escape the situation. The kind soul of Ashley Pittman. Ashley Scott, née Pittman, was born on November 4, 1978, in Bossier City, Louisiana. Her parents separated while she was still in her mother's womb. However, fate smiled upon Donna, and she met Jimmy Pittman, whom she later married. Jimmy adopted Ashley and loved her from the moment she was born. Notably, Jimmy already had a 5-year-old daughter named Kika. Unfortunately, Jimmy and Donna's marriage didn't last long, and they divorced a few years later. It's important to note that Donna left the family herself and eventually remarried. Ashley chose to stay with her father but continued to see her mother. Despite her parents' divorce, Ashley had a good childhood. She grew up kind and obedient. Everyone around her considered her a true beauty and predicted a bright future for her. In 1996, she graduated from high school and then enrolled at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas. It was there that she met her first love. Jeffrey Scott had attended the same school as her and, by a stroke of fate, enrolled at the same university. Jeffrey also noticed the beautiful girl with a radiant smile, and before long, they started dating. The young couple seemed perfect, always together and holding hands. Ashley's friends envied her, believing she had found a reliable partner. Ashley fueled their curiosity by sharing how sweet and kind he was and how lucky she felt to have him. In 2000, Pittman received her long-awaited degree in education. Now, her childhood dream was about to come true. She wanted to become a teacher and dedicate her life to children. Unhappy celebrations. Finally, on June 9, 2001, Ashley and Jeffrey got married. However, things didn't go as they had appeared in her girlhood dreams. Unexpectedly for everyone, a dark side of her chosen one came to light. To be more precise, it became noticeable to others, although the bride herself had known about it but chose to ignore it. A year before the wedding, Ashley sent a letter to her sister, Keika, stating that she could no longer communicate with them, but they should respect her decision. Naturally, her family wasn't invited to the wedding either. Friends of Ashley, who had the fortune to attend the ceremony, were shocked. The overwhelming majority of guests were from the groom's side, while Ashley had a large, close-knit family. This struck them as odd. However, they later understood why. The reason was that her family did not share her views on Jeffrey, and he made no effort to change their minds. Behind the seemingly nice guy lurked something sinister. He frequently spoke ill of her family and behaved inappropriately. He offended those close to her and felt justified in doing so. What was most surprising was her reaction. It was as if Ashley was making excuses for him. During the wedding, Jeffrey once again insulted some of her friends and acted arrogantly. Eventually, when the newlyweds moved to Cordova, a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, her relationships with many people deteriorated. Those who didn't turn away from her continued to stay in touch, but kept their distance. The dark side of Jeffrey Scott. After the move, the head of the family started working as a computer systems technician at his father's company. while the newly minted Mrs. Scott became an English teacher at a middle school. Everyone spoke highly of her. Ashley was considered beautiful and cheerful, intelligent and sociable. She loved her job and her students. Later, Paul Dooley described his colleague as a skilled specialist and talented educator. She was the main reason to get up in the morning and go to English class, he shared. In court, he admitted that the school was the only place where she felt safe and loved. The educational institution became a refuge where Jeffrey Scott couldn't reach her. Indeed, as time passed, the relationship between the spouses worsened. Ashley's connection with her family nearly broke. She didn't want to discuss it and called the situation her personal choice. Without a doubt, these conclusions were made under the influence of a master manipulator. Her husband was precisely that. In the early years, he completely dominated her and cut her off from outside support. Daily criticisms for every little thing lowered her self-esteem. Scott suppressed his wife in any way he could. During this period, she communicated with only a few people. Among them was her childhood friend, Lori. The girls had been friends since 5th grade and maintained contact into adulthood. Reunion evening. In September 2006, a high school reunion was planned for the school where Ashley studied. She was eager to attend, and despite her husband's reluctance, she went to the event. Those present didn't notice any significant changes in her. However, Lori was concerned. Throughout the evening, Jeffrey constantly called his wife, not allowing her to relax and enjoy herself. He asked whom she was talking to, what she was wearing, what she was eating and drinking, and what she was discussing. In short, he tried to control every minute of her life. That evening, Ashley confessed to Lori the nightmare she was living in and said she couldn't go on like this. She revealed that she was considering divorce and had even contacted a divorce attorney. She also admitted that she knew about her husband's repeated infidelities. She mentioned, for example, an affair with a colleague named Blair Brown, with whom she had once gotten along well. However, she noted that over time, she forgave her acquaintance. Blair had reached out to her to share who Jeffrey really was and how dangerous he could be. It should be noted that this party was the last in the young woman's life. After that, she didn't speak to anyone for several weeks, and new bruises appeared on her body. Lori's testimony. Detectives became interested in the stories shared by Ashley's relatives and friends. Through conversations with them, they gathered a lot of valuable information. Lori also revealed that shortly before Ashley's death, Jeffrey had called her several times to complain about his wife. He claimed that she drank heavily, lost her balance, and often fell, which explained why she was covered in bruises. However, the next morning, Ashley wouldn't remember these events and would blame him. He attributed her growing alcohol dependency to their mutual acquaintance, Blair, claiming that she had corrupted Ashley and turned her against him. He also mentioned that he no longer wanted to have children because he felt disgusted with his wife after everything that had happened. Scott accused his wife of constant infidelity, lying, and alcoholism. However, Lori didn't believe any of this and thought he was trying to justify himself. Eventually, Lori realized that Ashley had become a victim of domestic violence and was in serious trouble. After each of these calls, she would try to call her friend back, but Ashley wouldn't pick up, which was very strange. The last time they saw each other was shortly before the tragic events. The friends went shopping, but Ashley didn't buy anything for herself. She was sad and pensive. Lori tried to talk to her about her marriage, but Ashley said she didn't want to ruin the evening and changed the subject. The only thing she mentioned about the impending divorce was that she was ready to take that step but was very afraid. She knew Jeffrey well and feared his reaction could be completely unpredictable. Blair's testimony. Next, Blair Brown, whose name frequently came up in the Scott family, was called in for questioning. She admitted that she had indeed been Jeffrey's lover in the past. Therefore, she knew firsthand about his uncontrollable fits of rage. It was established that the friendship between the two women was rekindled about 6 months before the crime. Blair felt sympathy for her and provided occasional support. She also admitted that her relationship with Jeffrey was a mistake and apologized repeatedly for it. The women sometimes met and had drinks together. Ashley would often hide at Blair's place to get away from Jeffrey. One day, he tracked her down and came for her. At that moment, Blair witnessed a brutal attack. Scott struck his wife several times in the face and threw her out onto the street, completely unfazed by the presence of a witness. Even after these events, Ashley downplayed his guilt and made excuses for him. The accused. During another interrogation, Scott admitted that he contacted Robert McGee only 12 to 15 hours after the argument. All that time, his wife had been unconscious, alone in the garage. Jeffrey continued to insist that he had only struck her once because of the discovered infidelity. After that, he sent her to the garage, brought bedding, and threw it on the floor. The bleeding woman was left to spend her last hours freezing and suffering in pain, while her husband rested comfortably in the house. However, the autopsy results did not support his claims. It was clear that he had always treated his wife poorly. Additionally, detectives learned that Jeffrey occasionally used the services of escorts, even when Ashley was at the reunion. Despite this, he blamed her for all their problems. Indeed, shortly before she decided to file for divorce, Ashley met a young man named Michael Lowe. They exchanged messages from October 29th to November 22nd, 2006. He was the one who encouraged her to leave her husband, assuring her that he would support her and had everything ready for her departure. Michael told her that he loved her and wanted to show her a different life. When Jeffrey read their messages, he was enraged and decided to teach his unfaithful wife a lesson. The trial and the advocate. The trial of Jeffrey Scott began on January 13, 2009. The prosecution argued that it was a premeditated crime. It was evident that the argument between the spouses started in the living room, where a vase was found broken. They then moved through the house, with Ashley enduring violence in nearly every room. Bloodstains were found in almost every room. The divorce attorney Ashley had consulted testified for the prosecution. She explained that she had met with Ashley the day before her death. At that point, all the documents for the divorce were ready. All her client had to do was pack her things and leave the house while her husband was at work. Rachel advised that Ashley should leave secretly. This explains the items and documents found in her car. However, Ashley didn't follow the expert's advice. She didn't want to leave without explaining to her husband, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. The advocate tried her best to help Ashley and even provided her services for a symbolic fee. The attorney also mentioned that she knew her client had been drinking and had quit her beloved job because of it. She did this to numb the emotions she felt in her marriage and needed support. For a long time, the women communicated in secret. This was done to ensure Ashley's departure was as safe as possible. Since her husband controlled all calls, they met on neutral ground or communicated via payphone. Many witnesses confirmed that they had seen scratches or bruises on Ashley, which she carefully concealed under layers of makeup. Some knew the real cause of the injuries but felt powerless to help. In their final report, the medical examiners noted that Ashley had frequently been kicked. It seems Jeffrey would knock her to the ground and then stomp on her. Old bruises from shoes were found on her back and legs. The devil's advocate. The defense team for the accused worked tirelessly to reduce the charge to second-degree crime. The attorney painted the victim in an unflattering light, portraying her as an alcoholic and unstable hysteric. In short, they did everything possible to make the jury believe that Scott also suffered in the marriage. The defense discredited the victim, who couldn't defend herself because she was no longer alive. It was revealed that in 2005, Ashley had been fined for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Jeffrey claimed he wanted to repair the marriage, bought a new home, and was open to having children, all for a woman who had a lover and exchanged intimate photos with him. Regarding the crime itself, he claimed he lost control, realizing his efforts were futile and that Ashley had found someone else. "I regret the pain I caused you," he addressed his wife's family, "but I mourn her loss and pray for her soul." In contrast, during the trial, it was noted that after his arrest, Scott didn't ask about his wife's condition. Instead, he inquired about the outcome of a recent football game. His attorney played dirty. During his statement, he even claimed that the victim sustained most of her injuries during a seizure caused by alcohol withdrawal. An independent expert was found to back up this claim. To refute this, the assistant county medical examiner was called to testify. He read the autopsy results, listed all the injuries on the body, and most importantly, stated the cause of death, which could not have resulted from accidental falls. Prosecutor's argument. The prosecutor argued that the defense's version of an unintentional crime was absurd. It was clear that the victim wanted to escape her tormentor, but, out of affection for her husband, hoped to end things amicably. Meanwhile, the accused showed her the printout of her messages with Michael and attacked her. As he struck her repeatedly, he knew he was causing unbearable pain and suffering. He then finished her off in the garage, where she lost consciousness. Scott saw the severity of her injuries but ignored them and didn't seek medical help. The criminal chose to wait and only then called a doctor. The prosecutor insisted that the accused wanted his wife dead. However, a surprising fact came to light. Investigators found evidence that Ashley had wanted to save the marriage. It was discovered that she had been taking special medication to get pregnant and had supported the purchase of a new home. Perhaps she was so dependent on the toxic relationship that she couldn't imagine life without Jeffrey. However, she eventually decided to leave. It's possible she didn't want to leave secretly, hoping to hear from her husband that he would change and everything would be fine. Victims of abuse often cling to such illusory hopes. Guilty verdict. On January 19, 2009, Jeffrey Scott was found guilty of second-degree crime. Even the judge was dissatisfied with the jury's verdict, criticizing the jurors because the vote in favor of the original charge was 12-1. There was one person who didn't believe the accused was guilty enough. According to state law, a unanimous decision is required to convict someone of first-degree crime. The victim's family was also disheartened. The accused will spend 25 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. Conclusion. Perhaps this punishment isn't enough for someone who tormented a woman for years. The tyrant isolated her from everyone, brainwashed her, and made her think that she and her family weren't good enough to be part of his life. Nevertheless, Ashley's father said, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. I loved that little girl. If she had died a natural death, I would have come to terms with it over time. But knowing how cruelly my daughter died and who was responsible, I will never be able to accept it." The story of Ashley Scott's life teaches us many things, but most importantly, no matter what happens, we should never isolate ourselves from our loved ones. Sometimes, they are the only ones who truly care about us and can help us. Why do terrible things happen to good girls? Because bad boys attract them like moths to a flame. Timed, often naive, they idealize their partner, and they blatantly ignore the glaring red flags. Sometimes these destructive relationships last a long time, and other times, the realization comes quicker. Sooner or later, there comes a choice: leave or continue to get burned, until the moth burns to ashes. The incident that will be discussed entered the history of Austin, Texas, USA as one of the most heinous, and probably exceedingly didactic. Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. Late on the evening of August 16, 2005, Jennifer Cave, the new girlfriend of Michael Rodriguez, was last in touch. Throughout the night, Michael waited for her call. However, exhausted from work, he unwittingly fell asleep. By morning, there were no missed calls from her. Concerned, Michael remembered Jennifer had promised to call him back once she had dropped off her friend Colton at home. He was uneasy about the fact that she had to go out of her way because Colton didn't arrange his own ride home, and generally he didn't trust Colton and his lifestyle. Meanwhile, Jennifer's roommate, with whom she lived, found Jennifer not at home. Her alarm clock was blaring, but there was no one to turn it off. It seemed Jennifer hadn't spent the night at home. Her friend became worried. They usually informed each other of their plans. She tried calling Jennifer. There was no response, which was uncharacteristic of her. Jennifer has her first day of work today. It's unlikely she would go without changing, the roommate thought. Jennifer's office clothes were neatly hanging on the rack, appearing untouched as if she hadn't taken anything with her. On August 17th at 8:30 a.m., the director of the law firm was notified of the new employee's tardiness. During her internship, Miss Cave had made a positive impression. It was odd that she would allow herself such behavior on her first day of work. By 9 a.m., colleagues called Jennifer, but she didn't answer. Around 11 a.m., the employer sent one of the managers to check on her at home. Persistent knocking went unanswered. They then tried to reach out to the secondary contact number listed on her resume. Sharon Sedgwick, Jennifer's mother, answered the call. She was surprised and seemingly disappointed by the call. She said she would try to locate her daughter. Sharon also couldn't reach Jennifer. Growing worried, suspicion crept into her mind. Apparently she's dropped everything again for that irresponsible young man, she concluded. No one in Jennifer's circle liked her ex-boyfriend, Colton Petagnac. Despite his intellect and financial status, he always seemed to drag her down. Mrs. Sedgwick called Colton. He said he hadn't seen her daughter for some time. It seemed he wasn't concerned that Jennifer was missing. For some reason, her mother didn't believe him. More than 12 hours passed with no news. After all hospitals in Austin were checked to no avail, Sharon called the police. She reported her daughter missing and expressed concern that she might be in danger at Petagnac's house. Following the call to law enforcement, Sharon, along with her husband Jim Sedgwick, went to Colton's place to speak with him personally. However, he didn't open the door for them or the responding officers, claiming he had no desire to talk and they had no search warrant. He knew his rights well, so the police had to leave. However, the situation was suspicious. Jennifer's car was found near Petagnac's house. Although the car was empty, its presence in the parking lot was thought-provoking. It appeared Jennifer was indeed inside the house. Sharon and Jim were certain something had happened to her. The police decided not to waste time and inspected Jennifer's house. However, they found nothing of interest. The only leads were information from Michael and Sharon, as well as Jennifer's car near Colton's house. Michael recounted how Jennifer went out to meet with friends on the evening of August 16th to celebrate getting a job. She had called him several times. Among the friends was her ex-boyfriend Colton, who was with her at the time of the call. During the conversation, Jennifer didn't seem scared or worried, but mentioned that Colton was acting strangely, so she needed to take him home. After that, contact with her was lost. A grisly discovery. All clues led to Petagnac's residence. While the police were hesitating, Sharon and Jim decided to take matters into their own hands. They drove to Colton's place again. Upon arriving at the apartment complex, they knocked on the door, but no one answered. Sensing something was terribly wrong, the girls' parents decided to call a locksmith to open the lock. However, Jim found a better way. One of the apartment windows was open, and he decided to enter through it. Inside, everything was scattered around. It was clear that no one had maintained order in the house, and the apartment itself resembled more of a den. The man was hit by a putrid smell that immediately triggered his gag reflex. Covering his mouth with his hand, Jim moved toward where the smell was even stronger. The house was empty. Looking into the bathroom, Jennifer's stepfather noticed clutter. Upon closer inspection, he saw a dismembered female body. The head and limbs had been severed. Nearby lay trash bags and a sports bag. Horrified, Jim began to examine their contents. Inside were the remaining parts of the body. The legs of the deceased were covered with freckles, just like his stepdaughter's. However, the corpse was so mutilated that it was impossible to definitively identify who it was. The man hoped, until the last moment, that it was not his stepdaughter. After regaining consciousness, he called the emergency services. Jennifer's life. Jennifer Cave was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas. Her family lived in a modest farmhouse. Sharon, her mother, was in her second marriage, which brought 3 more children into the family: Jennifer herself, Lauren, and Clayton. Vanessa, from Sharon's first marriage, was the oldest sibling. Charlie, Jennifer's father, worked as a welder. He was a decent husband and father until alcohol turned him into someone mean and unbearable, hurling insults and causing trouble. When sober, he was calm and respectable. Despite the unstable home environment, the family remained close-knit. Sharon worked as an accountant at a chemical plant, while also taking care of the home and children. Unlike her more sociable brother and sister, Jennifer was shy. While they easily made friends and played outside, she preferred the company of books, which sharpened her intellect and gifted her with an excellent memory. Her passion for reading affected her eyesight, requiring her to wear glasses. Just like the braces in her mouth, the glasses didn't help her self-esteem. Confidence was not characteristic of our heroine, but that didn't stop her from actively participating in school's social and athletic activities. Eventually, her father's destructive habit led to the family's breakup. After the separation, Jennifer and Clayton stayed with Charlie. They supported him with great compassion, trying to prevent his downfall. Jennifer wanted so much to help her father quit drinking that she overlooked his lack of will to fight. 4 years after the divorce, in 1999, Sharon met a new man, Jim Sedgwick, by chance. As Jennifer entered her teenage years, she transformed. She got rid of her braces, and contact lenses replaced her glasses, turning her into a true beauty. However, her character began to change along with her appearance. She started hanging out with kids from troubled families. Yet, thanks to her high intellect, she graduated among the top of her class. Later, Jennifer enrolled in Texas State University, majoring in finance, but quickly became disillusioned with her studies and withdrew after the first semester. She spent some time attending a community college in Austin and worked part-time at a city restaurant to support herself. During this period, she dated a guy named Mark, a decent young man from a respectable family. Their relationship could have led to marriage, but Jennifer got pulled into the nightlife. She began frequenting parties and drinking. Perhaps influenced by her father's genes and negative example, her fondness for alcohol grew. Along with drinking, marijuana entered her life. Sharon tried to influence her daughter, but to no avail. It was during one of these nights out that Jennifer met Colton Petoniak, the tragic end of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer Cave's life was tragically cut short by a gunshot wound to her right arm. The bullet passed completely through her arm and into her chest, striking her heart. The injury to a vital artery led to rapid blood loss, resulting in her untimely demise. What happened to her body afterward is horrifying. Forensic experts discovered multiple stab wounds across her body, with her chest and neck suffering the most damage. In total, the assailant inflicted 18 post-mortem stab wounds. The perpetrator then decapitated her and fired a shot through her throat into her head, intending to dispose of her body discreetly. By severing her upper limbs, he placed them in a prepared bag and trash bags. Her torso was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. Something thwarted the assailant's initial plan, forcing a change in his actions. Evidence uncovered. At the time, Jennifer Cave's body was discovered, and the police arrived. They had not yet obtained a warrant to search Colton Petoniak's apartment. Initially, the officers could do nothing but observe the victim's body and secure the area. Once they finally obtained the necessary permission, a thorough search of the apartment was conducted. They found 3.38 caliber shell casings. The firearm used was located in Petoniak's car, which was parked in the garage. A large blood-stained machete was retrieved from the dishwasher. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in the victim's bloodstream. In one of the rooms, there was a road atlas with pages torn out, highlighting routes in southwest Texas. This clue shed light on the apartment owner's absence. Colton Petoniak had fled. Law enforcement immediately issued a warrant for his apprehension. Who is Colton Petoniak? Colton originated from Bryant, Arkansas. He grew up as a sharp-witted boy with impressive looks, enjoying popularity among girls during his teenage years. His father ran a successful agricultural business that flourished year after year, allowing the family to live comfortably. However, this abundance spoiled Colton. On one hand, he was ambitious and goal-oriented. On the other, he could become aggressive and hot-tempered. Colton was passionate about skateboarding and played the guitar. He attended a Catholic boys' middle school in Little Rock, where he excelled academically. and frequently made the honor roll. He was also a National Merit Scholarship finalist. In 2000, Pitoniak was one of 7 senior finalists at his school and among 166 in the state. By his senior year, he began to encounter problems with alcohol and fights, largely because he was part of a group of local affluent kids who led a leisurely lifestyle, often throwing parties with all the ensuing consequences. Nonetheless, thanks to high graduation scores, he easily got admitted to the University of Texas at Austin. Rather than focusing on his studies, he continued his wayward lifestyle, losing friends and gaining a reputation as a frequent drinker and marijuana user. He could have had a bright future if not for his penchant for self-destruction. After being expelled from a university fraternity, he began distributing controlled substances. His parents fought to curb his addiction, even taking him back home. A fateful meeting. In the spring of 2004, Jennifer and Colton met at a party. They were instantly drawn to each other. Jennifer, who often idealizes people, decided to give a potentially dangerous relationship a chance rather than run from it. Their friendship gradually grew into love. Over time, Jennifer began using illegal drugs with Colton. His luxurious apartment gradually turned into a den of excess, and using illegal substances together became a household rule. As a result, Jennifer's addiction only got worse. Parents repeatedly tried to tear her away from these addictions. They even gave her a car, hoping to encourage her to be home more often. However, each time she returned, her promises quickly faded. Colton's condition worsened. He became increasingly paranoid and began carrying a gun and knife in an attempt to mimic the image of a gangster. In 2004, Pitoniak was arrested for possession of illegal substances. He even went through a rehabilitation program once, but Colton showed no sincere desire to fight his addiction. Separation. One day, Jennifer's parents decided to visit her. However, the visit brought disappointment. Jennifer had not kept her promises, had lost a significant amount of weight, and looked generally unwell. Her family suggested she undergo treatment at a rehabilitation center, to which she flatly refused. Upset, Sharon and Jim cut off her financial support, believing this tough love approach would encourage her to take control of her life. But left without money, Jennifer found no better option than to move in with Colton. What happened in his apartment is hard to say, but after living with him for a month, Jennifer decided to leave. A friend offered her a room and support. Miss Cave shared her fears. She no longer felt safe with Colton but did not delve into details. Something clearly frightened her as she refused to reconcile with her ex. One day he came to her, asking her to come back. Jennifer remained firm, especially when she saw the knife Colton brought with him. She asked Colton to calm down and suggested they remain friends. Surprisingly, he agreed. Contact with him was minimized, and moreover, she began reconnecting with her parents. Finally, her life seemed to be getting back on track. In early 2005, Jennifer started a new relationship with a guy named Scott, a single father who appeared quite decent. His lifestyle was the polar opposite of Colton's. Scott worked as a waiter at a restaurant, played keyboards in a band, and was a good singer, all while leading a sober life. In turn, Jennifer began to feel better about herself, even looking healthier by his side. She took on the role of a homemaker and became a mother figure to his daughter. However, she was still liable to leave at a moment's notice if Colton called. The arrival of Laura Hall. Eventually, Colton moved to a new apartment complex with a pool named Orange Tree close to the university, making it a hot spot for daily parties. His behavior continued to be erratic, with some friends reporting they had seen him engaging in Russian roulette by himself. It was during one of these phases that he met Laura Ashley Hall. She was a frequent attendee of these parties and became infatuated with him, exhibiting jealousy towards any female in Colton's circle, especially Jennifer. Laura was perceived in various ways by their peers, most commonly described as arrogant and capable of putting anyone in their place. Laura, like Colton, came from a well-off family. Miss Hall was athletic, participating in various competitions, and she was academically successful, showing great promise. After high school, she enrolled in university but soon dropped out, opting for a job and a leisurely lifestyle instead. Before long, Colton and Laura started dating. Like Jennifer, she was deeply drawn to him. When he was sentenced to 60 days in jail in June 2005, Laura sent him all her earnings, even going into debt. Friends noted that she changed for the worse, becoming bold, neglecting her job and her personal care. Many believed she had also started using banned drugs. Unlike with Jennifer, Colton disregarded her feelings, even to the extent of extinguishing cigarettes on her. A new chapter begins, ends. During this time, Jennifer ended her relationship with Scott. She felt unworthy of his family and did not want to cause them any trouble. Jennifer occasionally communicated with Colton, who was still infatuated with her. However, she did not rekindle their previous relationship, keeping their interactions strictly platonic. All Jennifer desired was to secure a job and return to college. In August, a promising opportunity arose in her life. She began a new relationship with Michael Rodriguez and, most importantly, found an excellent job. After several days of training at a law firm, she performed so impressively that she was offered a consultant position with a respectable salary. Jennifer was proud of herself and truly happy. On August 16th, she decided to celebrate the start of her new life with friends. That evening, they went to a bar and then headed to a club. According to a friend, the bouncer didn't let Colton in because of his appearance. This might have led him to seek out controlled substances. The investigation continues. In an effort to shed light on the events of that fateful night, investigators interviewed Colton's neighbors. They managed to uncover intriguing information. Around 3 a.m. on August 17th, Nora Sullivan heard a knock at her door. Opening it, she saw Colton standing there looking suspicious with blood on him and a pistol visible at his waist. Startled, she inquired what had happened. Colton told her he had gotten into a shootout with some individuals. Nora didn't hear any gunshots and thought he was lying as usual. She closed the door and peeked through the peephole to see him eventually walk away. None of the neighbors interviewed heard any gunshots that night either. Detectives also discovered that Colton had been in contact with Laura twice that night. The morning of August 17th, he visited a hardware store where he purchased a saw, several masks, and gloves, as well as a significant amount of cleaning supplies. Using these, he dismembered Jennifer's body and planned to clean the apartment to erase any evidence of the crime. It's possible that the unexpected arrival of Sharon and Jim startled him and prompted his flight. Apprehension. A critical discovery in Colton's apartment led investigators directly to his trail. Colton, along with Laura Hall, was found in Mexico. They had crossed the border in Laura's car. Local authorities distributed Colton's photo nationwide. During this time, the couple enjoyed themselves, visiting cinemas and restaurants. They stayed in a hotel in the border town of Piedras Negras, where an employee recognized Colton as the sought-after individual. The employee took his photo and sent it to the police. Mexican law enforcement apprehended the duo and transported them to the border, where U.S. officials arrested Petagnac. Laura Hall was released. Before her release, Laura caused a scene with the Border Patrol, loudly protesting Colton's innocence and obstructing the arrest process. Later, she admitted that their trip to Mexico was the best experience she'd ever had. In total, they spent about 5 days abroad. Trial. On August 23, 2005, Colton Petagnac was charged with a crime against Jennifer Cave. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. The prosecution presented evidence found in the apartment, including a videotape from the store and a receipt listing items purchased. Colton said he did not remember anything about the night of August 16th, 17, attributing his amnesia to heavy drinking and the use of illegal drugs. Initially, he did not deny hurting Jennifer, but insisted he did not remember anything. He claimed that he woke up and discovered his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom. After discovering the body, he contacted Laura, who advised him to buy a saw and cleaning supplies. She helped dismember the victim and hide the body parts in bags. The prosecution argued that she was responsible for Jennifer's post-mortem injuries. Colton later hinted that Hall may have been motivated by jealousy, suggesting her involvement in an act of revenge against her rival. However, both defendants pleaded not guilty. Nevertheless, the evidence of his involvement was overwhelming. First, Jennifer's body was found in Colton's apartment. His fingerprints and DNA were found on the machete, saw, and firearm found at the crime scene, and the weapon in his car was identified as the crime weapon. In addition, he was the one who purchased the cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt of his guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton Petoniak was sentenced to 55 years in prison with parole eligibility after serving at least half of his sentence. His earliest release date will not occur until 2060. The case against Laura Hall proved complex. The prosecution suggested she could have acted out of blind affection for Colton. Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a store towel, and even the firearm used. The defense argued this only proved her involvement in disposing of the body, not in the initial act. They couldn't prove she was the one who fired the first shot, attributed to Jennifer's head post-mortem. No evidence placed her at the scene at the time of the crime. Laura insisted she only learned of the crime when Colton told her and claimed he forced her to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses from their time in Mexico reported the couple seemed to enjoy their trip. In 2007, Laura Hall was found guilty of obstructing justice and tampering with evidence, receiving a 6-year prison sentence. A subsequent trial in 2010 resulted in the maximum sentence of 11 years and a $14,000 fine. Laura was paroled on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring, completing her sentence in August of the same year. Her whereabouts thereafter remain unknown. Was Colton framed? Colton Petoniak remains incarcerated. He has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been unsuccessful. In these appeals, he consistently stated, but he has no memory of the tragic night's events. However, he revealed that there are witnesses who claim Laura confessed to Jennifer's demise. He alleges that during the trial, the prosecutors were aware of this information but failed to disclose it to his defense team, suggesting a possible setup. Although Petoniak's legal motions were denied, this revelation raised questions among the public. Moreover, Jennifer's parents believe that Laura's punishment was insufficient. They are convinced that she played a more significant role than she admits. Unlike Colton, Hall has never expressed remorse or regret for Jennifer's death. She referred to Jennifer only as that girl or the dead girl, sometimes even using derogatory terms. To this day, the exact events of that fateful night remain unknown. Only Jennifer knows the truth that the walls of Petoniak's residence silently conceal. Sadly, the dead cannot speak. Jennifer's life was cut short in her prime. Regrettably, she realized too late an essential truth. Staying away from certain individuals and ceasing communication with them could mean saving oneself. The Marlene Oaks case. Who owns the skull found in the woods? A crime is considered perfect when it has achieved its main goal and the perpetrator has not been punished or has not been suspected at all. However, these days, thanks to the latest technology and scientific approach, it is becoming increasingly difficult to commit such a thing. Moreover, even old, unsolved cases that seemed perfect in the past are being successfully solved decades later. In 1980, an auto mechanic named William Bill Major also thought he had committed the perfect crime that would never be solved. Hardly a man could have guessed that, more than 2 decades later, he will still have to stand trial and get a well-deserved sentence. And the initiator of the new investigation was his own daughter, whom he deprived of a mother in early childhood. And now, let's study the whole story in detail, deconstruct this perfect crime and imminent punishment. To be fair, it should be noted that this high-profile and very cruel case of the disappearance of a young mother, Marlene Oaks, could have been solved back in the distant 80s because the victim herself, who had a premonition of her imminent death, left many clues to the police, to which the law enforcers for some reason did not pay due attention. Marlene Oaks, the early years. A girl named Helen Marlene Oaks was born in 1954, the 7th of December, in the small town of Martinsville, in the state of Virginia, and was the middle of 3 children of the spouses Lorraine and William Oaks. She was raised with an older brother and a younger sister. Their family lived quite modestly, but the parents always tried to provide their children with everything they needed and bring them up worthy people. By the way, our today's heroine from childhood preferred to use her middle name, Marlene. which she liked much more than Helen. She was petite and very cute blonde, with brown eyes and a charming smile, so it was not surprising that she had a lot of admirers from an early age. At the age of 16, barely out of school, the girl, wanting to soon start an independent life and escape from parental care, hurried to tie herself to the bonds of marriage. Her chosen one was a man named William Major, who was 10 years older than her, but the couple in love, the difference in age did not confuse. The chosen one worked as an auto mechanic and seemed to the girl a serious and reliable man. Unhappy family life. Soon after the couple officially legalized their relationship, they settled in a trailer park on the outskirts of a small country town of Verona, located in Boone County, Kentucky. In 1972, the couple had their first common heir, a son, to whom they decided to give the name Donald. At that time, Marlene was barely 17 years old, and her husband was already 27 years old. 4 years later, the couple had a younger daughter, Lana. The couple still lived in a small trailer on the grounds of the trailer park. Marlene was a homemaker, raising their children and making their modest home comfortable, while Bill worked at a service station fixing cars. He was good at what he did and was, so to speak, a jack of all trades. He had every chance to build a brilliant career, to open his own business, but the man did not particularly strive for anything. Money spouses barely enough for the essentials, but the head of the family, every time he managed to earn a little more, as a rule, spent it all on drink. Later, his addictions were joined by the use of illegal substances. At the same time, Bill was a sociable person, sociable and seemed very friendly to others. All these qualities helped him a lot in his work. People who turned to his workshop for help often came back again, and also recommended Majors as a good specialist to their friends. However, at home, Bill became a completely different person, rude, selfish, and cruel. Former feelings that had once linked their lives together with Marlene seemed to have evaporated without a trace, left only misunderstanding, resentment, and irritation. The couple often quarreled, and sometimes their heated arguments escalated into violence. Bill was not a caring husband and loving father, and over time he became more and more like a domestic tyrant. A new neighbor and a secret lover. In 1978, a young Canadian named Glenn St. Hiller was passing through the town of Verona, and his truck suddenly broke down. On the advice of the locals, he went to the workshop of Bill Major, who willingly undertook to repair the vehicle. The stranger was traveling from Ohio to Texas. He didn't know anyone in the area, and the only hotel in the suburbs was closed, and he simply didn't know where to stay. When Glenn complained to the auto mechanic about the situation he found himself in, Bill promised to help, and quickly found him a place to stay in a trailer park and invited him over for dinner. The guest was literally enchanted by Marlene's beauty, her kindness and friendliness. The young woman cooked a delicious meal, willingly and with interest kept the conversation, seemed very nice and open. 2 weeks later, Glenn visited Verona again to thank Bill for his help, and after another month he decided to move here for a while. The man settled in the same suburban trailer park and took a job in Bill's shop, becoming Bill's subordinate. Also, the new neighbor began to show interest in Marlene, and in every possible way sought meetings with her. The situation in the family Major has long been very tense. The spouses only quarreled, shouted at each other, exchanged insults, and sometimes even fought. For Marlene, communication with kind and courteous Glenn became a real outlet. They quickly became close, and soon became lovers. The couple spent all their free time together, trying to hide from prying eyes, but in a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other, gossip spreads quickly. Soon the rumors reached Bill, but the cheating husband didn't seem particularly upset about it. Moreover, he even strangely encouraged their relationship, and he seemed to have lost interest in his young wife. The explanation for this behavior was soon found, and it turned out to be truly monstrous. Major, as it turned out, had an unhealthy interest in his own children, and soon he began to realize his secret fantasies. The ugly truth and the beginning of the divorce proceedings. Soon, Marlene noticed some oddities and changes in the behavior of 8-year-old Donald. The boy became withdrawn, nervous, did not sleep well, and was afraid to be alone with his father. When his mother decided to have a frank talk with him, the child told her the terrible things his father did to him and asked her to protect him. Marlene was horrified by her son's confessions and realized that it was simply impossible to continue living like this. She had long planned to divorce Bill, get sole custody of the children, and move with Glenn and the kids to her native Virginia, closer to her parents. Her lover also suggested that she do this, and now there was a real reason to hurry up with the divorce and move. Marlene told her husband everything she had learned from her son about his unacceptable behavior, declared her intention to divorce, and also threatened to report him to the police. The scandal quickly escalated into manhandling, and Bill hit his wife hard in the face several times. From that moment, the spouses were literally in a state of war. Marlene initiated the beginning of the divorce process, but separated from her husband. She could not yet because of the children, because she wanted to achieve officially sole custody of them. Her husband beat her almost daily, insulted her, and threatened to kill her. He promised to kill her and said that he would make sure that no one would ever find the body and that he would stay with the children. The unhappy young woman simply did not know what to do. She secretly kept a personal diary in which she wrote down everything Bill said to her, how he threatened to kill her and cover his tracks. Moreover, several times, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, Bill described in detail how he would get rid of his wife, dismembered her, and hid the remains in different places. The most important role in hiding the crime he assigned to the removal of all the teeth, so that the body would not be identified by dental records. It is noteworthy that all these terrible things Meager and Cullors described not only his wife, but also some of his friends, who, however, did not take his words seriously. Meanwhile, the situation was escalating, and the neighbors who lived in the trailer park became daily witnesses of the stormy marital strife. Marlene runs away with no kids and no lover? Everyone knew that Marlene had filed for divorce and was planning to move to another state with Glenn and the children. No one judged Marlene. Everyone knew how difficult and unhealthy the situation was in her family. But relatives and neighbors expected that everything would be resolved in a peaceful and civilized way. On October 11, 1980, around noon, the spouses once again loudly scandalized, but soon all quieted down. Toward nightfall, an agitated and angry Bill led the children to one of the neighboring trailers and knocked. He said that his wife had run off with her lover, leaving his son and daughter behind, and asked him to watch the kids until tomorrow while he tried to find Marlene and bring her home. The neighbors agreed to shelter the children for the night, and immediately thought that the young woman had run away with Glenn, but wondered how a loving and caring mother could abandon her adored offspring. What was everyone's bewilderment when Glenn came out of his trailer in the morning, and to all the questions about the escape, he only stared at those around him incomprehensibly. It turned out that he had not seen his beloved since yesterday, and in general was not aware that she disappeared somewhere. Then Glenn himself went to Bill to clarify the situation, but the furious husband only shouted that his wife found another lover and lost her head. However, Glenn did not believe his words, because he knew for sure that no other man at Marlene was not, and she under no circumstances would not abandon the children. A day later, Major himself went to the police, where he reported the disappearance of his wife, outlining his version of events. He added that their family car had also disappeared, which he believed supported the runaway version. But the police also found the whole story very strange. They had the impression that Bill was making it up as he went along, sometimes contradicting himself and confusing himself in elementary clarifying questions. Search for the missing woman, interrogation of witnesses. The police decided to begin the investigation of this case with a survey of neighbors and relatives of the couple, as well as studying the circumstances of the disappearance of the young woman. All unanimously spoke about the difficult relationship between the spouses, but claimed that Marlene would never have left Donald and Lana because she loved them more than life. There were also those who heard about Bill's creepy stories about how he would kill his wife and dispose of the body. This prompted the man's arrest and interrogation, but he himself claimed that it was just drunken chatter, and he didn't really intend to harm his spouse. The next oddity was that a search of the house revealed the missing woman's passport, wallet with cash and driver's license, as well as all of her personal belongings. It seemed as if she had just gotten into a car and left without her belongings, money, or documents. But where to? Marlene's relatives could not answer this question, but her sister mentioned about their last disturbing phone conversation, that Oakes was afraid for her life, and kept a diary in which she wrote down everything that happened to her. The information about the diary was of great interest to the detectives, but nothing similar was found when they searched the trailer. A few days later, Glenn showed up at the police station with the diary. He explained that Marlene had left her notes for him to keep, in case something happened to her, or she disappeared somewhere without a trace. When the woman did go missing, he waited a few days and then, realizing she wasn't coming back, took the notebook to the station. The pages contained some truly gruesome entries, including beatings, humiliation, and threats. There was also a detailed description of how Bill had promised to kill his wife. In addition, Marlene wrote about the fact that the husband showed a sick interest in children. In this regard, it was decided to talk to Marlene's son, but he did not provide any valuable information, practically did not answer questions, and only constantly asked to let him go home. For some reason, the detectives did not pay attention to the fact that the boy was scared and simply could not truthfully answer questions. His father had interviewed him beforehand, and Donald was afraid to say anything unnecessary for fear of his parents' anger. They decided not to traumatize 4-year-old Lana and did not interrogate her. For the next few weeks, police officers scoured the neighborhood looking for any leads or clues. Marlene and her car were wanted statewide, but the young woman and the vehicle seemed to have vanished into thin air. There was no reason to believe she was dead or murdered. The investigation has reached a dead end. The move looks like an escape. Despite the fact that relatives and neighbors testified against Bill, and the man himself was repeatedly called in for questioning, no grounds for his arrest were ever found. Neither a body nor any conclusive evidence that Marlene might have been seriously injured was found, and she was still missing. Major began to quickly sell off his property, explaining that he was going to move closer to his parents, because it is very difficult for him to manage 2 children after the escape of his wife. Among other things, he sold his weapons, namely a rifle, a shotgun, and a couple of pistols. His strange behavior resembled not a preparation for moving, but an ordinary escape. To the children, Bill kept telling them that their mother never loved them, so she abandoned them. He said that Marlene was an alcoholic, that she had tons of lovers who were more important to her than her family. Bill diligently turned his son and daughter against their own mother, trying to make them hate the most dear person. It should be noted that he succeeded quite well, because Donald and Lana were still small and blindly believed their father. Soon Bill and his children moved to the state of Rhode Island, where his parents lived. There they purchased a trailer and settled down for many years. But after the disappearance of Marlene, in the life of Donald and Lana began a real black streak. Their father brutally beat them, abused them, humiliated them, and did even more terrible things. At first, it was mostly Donald who was subjected to these tortures, but as Lana grew older, the bitter fate did not spare her. About a year later, the man had a new lover named Pauline, with whom they began to live together, but could not legalize their relationship because Major was still married to the missing Marlene. Nevertheless, the couple had a child together, and for some time the family lived a quiet life, until one day Pauline herself did not witness what Bill was doing with his own son. She immediately went to the police, telling them everything, took her child, and left. Bill was eventually arrested, and his children went to live with their maternal grandparents in Virginia. A gruesome find in the woods. About 1.5 years after Marlene's mysterious disappearance, a hunter came across a frightening sight in a wooded area near a Verona trailer park. He saw that his dog had started digging in the ground, and something resembling a fragment of a human skull emerged. The man immediately reported it to the police, and the arriving experts confirmed his hunch. It was indeed a badly damaged skull. The found remains were immediately sent to forensic experts for a detailed study, and the conclusions of experts were really frightening. The skull had a missing lower jaw and not a single tooth. There were 2 bullet holes in it, and the shots were made at point-blank range, and also the experts revealed on the bones chopped marks from a large knife or axe, which probably separated the head from the body. It was impossible to determine unequivocally to whom this skull belonged, but judging from the size and condition of the bones, it was assumed that it was a young woman, under 30 years of age. Naturally, the story of Marlene's disappearance immediately came to mind. The entire area within a radius of several kilometers was thoroughly combed, but no other remains or belongings were found, and so the discovery was dubbed Jane Doe, which means unknown, and the search was suspended. A new investigation 20 years later. When Donald and Lana moved into their grandparents' house, their lives gradually got better. Most of all, they were afraid of the day when their father would be released, but Bill, after his release, was not interested in his grown-up offspring at all, and did not even try to get in touch with them. For a long time, Lana did not talk about her mother at all, because she was angry at her for leaving them with a tyrant father. But one day, during a frank conversation with her grandmother, Lana asked her why her mother had fallen out of love with her and her brother and left the family. To what the old woman replied that she did not believe in the story of the escape and believes that it was her spouse has dealt with her. At this point, the girl's world turned upside down. She looked at the situation in a completely different way and realized that the grandmother was right. The girl decided to conduct her own investigation and uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance. The first thing Lana did was to keep a notebook in which she wrote down everything she could remember from her childhood, as well as everything her older brother knew and remembered. In 1998, when the girl was already 22 years old, she decided to go to her native Verona in order to talk to former neighbors and find out if any of them have valuable information that will help her. As it turned out, in those places still lived Glenn, who did not lose hope that one day the mystery of the disappearance of his beloved will be solved. His personal life has not developed. The man was lonely, worked at a local factory, and was constantly interested in the investigation of the case of Marlene Oakes. It was from Glenn Lana learned about the diary that her mother kept, which she gave him for safekeeping before her disappearance. This diary was later added to the case file and lost somewhere on the shelves of the police archives. Lana was able to get permission to see her mother's writings and was literally shocked by the contents of the diary. Not only did her mother know she was about to die, but she also gave the name of her killer, the method of death, and the process of hiding the evidence. After reading the notes, the girl immediately rushed to her father, whom she had not seen for more than 10 years, in order to find out the truth. It should be noted that Bill, after his release from prison, remarried, but in 1995 he had a stroke, and since then he has been confined to a wheelchair. When he learned the reason for his daughter's visit, he only laughed in her face. Lana begged him to tell her where he had hidden Marlene's remains so that she could give her mother a decent burial. The girl promised that she would not go to the police, and everything Bill said would remain just between them. But the father only insulted his daughter, called her crazy, and said that she would never know what happened to her mother. From her mother's diary, Lana learned about the perfect crime her father was preparing, which included dismembering her, removing all of her teeth, and burying the remains in different places. Also Lana, who along with her brother was bullied by Bill as a child, found out some horrific details from her father's biography. It turned out that even before meeting their mother, Bill served time for harassment. But for some reason, this circumstance police officers passed over when entrusted majoru custody of the children after the disappearance of their mother. In 2000, 2 decades after Marlene's disappearance, her daughter initiated a new investigation into the case, providing all the materials she had managed to collect on her own. Lana and her brother were re-interviewed, and this time they recounted everything their father had done to them, the beatings being the least of their troubles. At the same time, Lana learned about an unidentified skull fragment with no teeth or lower jaw that had been found in the local woods a year and a half after her mother's disappearance. She began to insist on the need for DNA testing, but at the time the procedure was extremely expensive, and government agencies refused to cover the cost. However, Lana did not even think of giving up and organized a fund to raise money for the procedure. Relatives, neighbors, and just concerned people joined in, and eventually, by the beginning of 2001, Lana already had the necessary amount of money to carry out the identification procedure. The analysis established the degree of the girl's kinship with the previously unidentified remains and determined that the skull fragment found did indeed belong to the missing Marlene Oakes. Then Lana, already having the results of the examination, went to her paternal grandfather to talk to him and find out if he knows anything. The elderly man was shocked by the news and agreed to testify to the police against his own son. Bill's father said that back in 1980, his son, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, told him that he killed his wife with 2 shots in the head, dismembered her body with a hunting knife, and buried the remains in different places at an impressive distance from each other. At the same time, he got rid of the lower jaw and teeth especially carefully. As for Marlene's car, he threw it off a cliff into the river, but the police eventually failed to find the car or its fragments. Most likely, for more than 2 decades, the turbulent mountain river either carried the vehicle far downstream or completely destroyed it, literally grinding it against sharp rocks. A trial and a just verdict. Despite the new circumstances and the evidence found, there was still no probable cause to arrest Bill. Then the police decided to go for a trick and asked Bill's father to bring his son to a frank phone conversation so that he confessed to everything. The trick succeeded, and Major, learning that his daughter seeks to resume the investigation, said that she will not succeed because he has safely hidden all the fragments of his wife's body, her car, and got rid of the instrument of crime. It was these words of Bill that became the reason for his arrest, because he actually confessed to everything himself. In July 2001, the man was taken into custody. After listening to the recording of the telephone conversation, as well as learning about the identification of the skull, he confessed to what he had done. However, he blamed everything on his late wife, saying that she simply drove him to scandals, cheating, as well as threats to take his children and forbid him to see them. At the trial, Bill told his version of the story, saying that he and his wife had a fight in the car and she started threatening him with a gun, but he grabbed the gun from her and allegedly, accidentally shot her twice in the head, except that the shots were fired into the back of her head at point-blank range, which looked like a premeditated crime, but not self-defense. Bill's trial did not begin until the summer of 2003, 23 years after his crime. At the hearing, the 59-year-old defendant was brought in a wheelchair. He himself behaved calmly and was confident that he would be able to avoid punishment. The lawyer hired by him insisted that this crime was the result of self-defense, and the stories of Lana and Donald about harassment are not true. But despite the defense's best efforts, the court found Major guilty of the brutal, premeditated murder of Marlene Oakes. The man was sentenced to life in prison, which came as a complete surprise to him. In December 2016, Bill tried to apply for parole but was denied. A year later, he died in prison after suffering a second stroke. Harmful obsession. On May 2, 2009, in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national non-profit organization for students in professional and technical fields where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, She worked part-time at the El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2nd, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girls sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off, and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schnellers' life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leading him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Brianna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone, against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Poncerocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect Raul Ponce-Rocha. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Ponce-Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Ponce-Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raul Ponce Rocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Walpoon, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police, and even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm. This story unfolded in Washington, in Spokane, the state's second-largest city. Situated along the river of the same name, it's the heart of the so-called Inland Northwest. The city's name originates from the Spokane tribe, translating from the Salishan languages of the local Native Americans as Children of the Sun. However, in today's world, Spokane is notorious for its dichotomy. As beautiful and appealing as it is to tourists on the outside, it can be just as dangerous for its residents. According to state data, Spokane County has the highest crime rate in Washington, doubling the state's average. Law enforcement reports that a majority of local-level offenses are connected to domestic violence. And so, today's tale of a young Cinderella has a pretty exterior and a bitter taste within. The Holden family, a typical American household, had long resided in Spokane. They adored children, hence the home was always full of them. Judy and John Holden had 2 daughters and an adopted son, Joshua. The adult daughters had left the nest and lived independently for some time. However, their only son, Joshua, remained with his parents. The large, melancholic, and perpetually gloomy young man hadn't managed to start his own family and was thus reluctantly staying in his parental home. The care for children in this family was expressed in an unconventional manner. It began and ended with merely providing shelter. Judy and John didn't spoil their foster children with attention and care. All the foster children lived according to a strict schedule and were punished for misdeeds. The children became a small family enterprise. The desire to have a stable income in the form of significant benefits compelled the Holden family to take not just 1 or 2 children from the shelter. Judy had an educational background and had her own grown children with successful destinies. Hence, the guardianship authorities trusted the family and initially placed children with them for foster care, and then, upon mutual agreement, for adoption. Thus, one day, a sweet 4-year-old girl named Courtney appeared in the Holden family. Courtney Corin Holden was born on February 28, 1992, and ended up in the shelter 2 years later. Life in the shelter was not joyful for the girl, as it was for all children there. Every new day in the orphanage began with a prayer. Children of various ages dreamily prayed to the Almighty to give them a mom and dad, and one joyful day, the girl's wishes were fulfilled. Little Courtney went to Spokane. Courtney was just 4 years old when she first stepped into the Holdens' home. She started living with Joshua and several other foster children. When the door closed behind her, the girl's dreams of a caring and loving family remained just dreams. If life in the shelter seemed sad and joyless to Courtney, at the Holdens, it turned into a real nightmare. From her early childhood, she was forced to do all kinds of housework. She had to clean the whole house, wash dishes for all the family members after every meal, and if she made a mistake, she was punished. What was especially surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children much better, and no one could understand the reason for their hatred of this pretty girl. Judy Holden was already of a considerable age by then, and Courtney became the last child they took from the orphanage. Perhaps it was in this that their inexplicable malice and hatred towards the girl was hidden. Courtney was even forbidden from going outside without permission. People who visited their home often heard Judy and Joshua mistreating Courtney, calling her Cinderella, as if she were a fairy tale character who, in real life, was a stepmother's and evil sister's slave. Courtney found herself in a similar role. However, the girl was very responsive, and over the years living with the Holdens, got used to the harsh conditions. She feared her foster mother, and her brother Joshua instilled terror in the girl with just his presence. He forbade her from socializing with peers. She had no mobile phone or other modern conveniences. She never left the house without necessity and permission. A breath of fresh air, as well as chatting with neighbors, was something she enjoyed only when the house was empty, stepping out into the backyard. Courtney's upbringing was under such conditions. Over time, she grew into an adult and simply got used to her life. She didn't become bitter, but always treated her foster parents with respect, as she knew no other life and had no concept of a normal family. Courtney gained a bit of freedom when Joshua, due to irreconcilable differences with the parents, moved to his sister's place for a considerable time. For Courtney, this was the happiest time of her life. She finally experienced the long-awaited taste of freedom, could freely leave the house, stroll, and meet with peers. Time passed. Courtney finished school and fell in love for the first time. Michael was a worthy partner for her. She felt care and attention from a man she had never received from anyone. After each meeting, Courtney was on cloud nine. Their relationship lasted until 2011 when they had a son. Desperately, Michael pleaded with his beloved to move in with him and live as a full family. But for some unknown reason, the young mother refused him and did not move, continuing to live in the despised Holden's house, and ended all romantic relations with Michael. By that time, the Holden house had become empty. The foster children had grown up and moved out. John Holden, Courtney's foster father, had passed away, so for a long time, she lived only with her foster mother Judy and her child. Michael was allowed to visit his son exclusively with the stepmother's permission. During the period when Courtney's brother Joshua was absent, their life with the little son was quite peaceful. But after the father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to fiercely terrorize the family home. He installed many surveillance cameras around their house on Hero Avenue, about a block from Rogers Middle School in northeast Spokane. Signs reading, "Smile, you're on camera," were scattered all over the yard, with several cameras pointing in different directions. The surveillance cameras made Courtney anxious again, as she knew venturing outside would bring trouble from Joshua for escaping. Courtney's life became unbearable once more. Around 2015, Courtney confided to a neighbor that she was once again not allowed to have a mobile phone, manage social media accounts, talk to anyone outside her family, drive a car, or even leave the house without Joshua's permission. The birth of her child had so embittered Joshua Holden that he forced the young woman to cease all contact with her son's father. Courtney silently complied. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms, and when they inquired about their origin, she candidly admitted, "Joshua hits me." Concerned neighbors wondered why Courtney endured such treatment and tried in every way to help her. They contacted the police to draw attention to Courtney's plight, but the Holdens managed to quash the case each time, as the victim herself never openly admitted to being under family terror from her brother. Eventually, Courtney was deprived of the privilege of talking to neighbors, who since then only saw her outside in the evenings, as she was not allowed out during the day. Courtney silently obeyed again. No one knew Joshua like Courtney did. A tall, large, and overweight man, he possessed enormous physical strength and never held back in insults. Joshua's friends described him as a man with a paranoid disposition, cruel and unpredictable in nature. He once bragged publicly about his ability to easily end a life and dispose of the body without difficulty. He had a notable criminal record. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but due to a lack of evidence and the victim's unwillingness to cooperate with the police, he was released. He was also suspected of an assault and misconduct against a woman in 2003 when the perpetrator could not be identified. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for domestic violence against his mother and for burglary. These incidents prompted his flight from the parental home for several years. Upon his return, Joshua became even more ferocious. He installed cameras not just outside but also inside the house to keep complete control over Courtney. The young mother almost stopped communicating with friends, mentioning she was afraid to go anywhere for fear Joshua would find out and things would get worse. One person communicated with Courtney every day through Facebook until Joshua discovered she had an account. "I have to go. I must leave. Josh is coming," she said in her last message nearly 2 years ago. Then, her account went dark permanently. The dynamics within the Holden household were described by family acquaintances as peculiar. People familiar with the family were puzzled as to why Courtney's child referred to Judy as Mom and Joshua as Dad, while his biological mother was mentioned strictly by her first name. This led some to speculate that perhaps Joshua was indeed the child's father. Neighbors and acquaintances condemned the Holdens for their unusual lifestyle and antisocial behavior, opting to steer clear of their home. In August 2018, following yet another dispute, Courtney hastily packed her belongings into a suitcase and ran out onto the street. An irate Judy shouted after her, "Come back home," to which Courtney replied, "I won't stay here anymore." Moments later, an enraged Joshua, standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds, forcibly lifted 160-pound Courtney and carried her back into the house. Judy slammed the door shut. According to a neighbor, she couldn't resist. This was the last time that this neighbor, and possibly anyone outside the household, saw Courtney. The young woman who had lived a life of invisibility remained so. It took almost 2 years before neighbors and acquaintances started to worry about her disappearance. In October 2019, a year and a half after she vanished, concern for Courtney Holden's whereabouts came from her child's father and his current girlfriend. They hadn't seen Courtney for almost 2 years, and the father was eager to see his child. The father of Courtney's son filed a missing person report with the police. On October 24th, the police, armed with a search warrant, went to the Holden residence and were surprised to find Courtney indeed not there. Neither Joshua nor Judy was willing to cooperate with the authorities. Courtney's stepmother allowed detectives to peek into her room, but then asked them to leave the house as soon as possible. Search dogs were even brought in, but to no avail. The Holdens claimed that Courtney had abandoned her son and ran away. They couldn't explain who could continue to cash the Social Security benefits deposited into her account or who was using the electronic food stamps. However, on the same day the search was conducted at the Holden home, Judy and Joshua withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. A coincidence occurred the next day when an unknown woman, claiming to be Courtney, called the National Center for Criminal Information in America. She stated she was safe and did not want to be searched for. Police traced the call and identified the woman as one of Courtney's step-sisters. Later, Joshua and Judy told many contradictory stories about Courtney's disappearance. Once they claimed she ran away with a truck driver, and in another version, it was a secret lover she had hidden from everyone. Courtney's absence and the constantly varying statements from those she lived with made the Holdens suspect. Clearly having something to hide, Joshua and Judy Holden hastily left Spokane by the end of October 2019. Their flight only convinced detectives of their involvement in Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens were tracked down in Texas at the home of one of Judy's adopted daughters. Authorities were able to charge them with cashing benefits intended for Courtney, as well as with identity theft, which allowed for their arrest and detention in a Texas jail. The Spokane Police Department attempted a welfare check on Courtney in early October, but it quickly turned into a missing person case handed over to major crimes detective Randy Lesser. Lesser spoke with the Spokesman Review about the investigation after the search warrants he filed in the Spokane County Superior Court became public. This report on Courtney's disappearance and the investigation is based on police interviews and court records. Courtney was officially declared missing. Alerts were sent to all states, and several news broadcasts featured the missing person case, initiating an extensive search for her. When patrol officers and detectives visited the home for various reasons, Joshua and Judy Holden refused to cooperate with the investigation, an unusual behavior when it comes to welfare checks and missing persons cases. On the day Courtney was declared missing, a woman claiming to be her called crime check to say she was fine. The police dispatcher also spoke with the woman claiming to be Courtney. Later, it was discovered that it was actually Courtney's sister, who did not tell Lesser why she had impersonated her, presumably to deflect suspicion from Judy and halt the search efforts. "I'm concerned that she might potentially be deceased," Lesser said in an interview with the Spokesman Review. Lesser expressed particular concern about Joshua's history of violence. Joshua had been charged with assault in the past, but the case was dropped shortly before trial when the victim ceased cooperating with the prosecution. Investigators were in the process of obtaining DNA evidence, and court documents from that case indicated that Holden was suspected in another assault back in 2003. Neighbors and family described Joshua as unstable, cruel, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. A neighbor mentioned that Joshua was unemployed and Judy feared him. Joshua had also been arrested on charges related to unlawful imprisonment and domestic violence, and he had been convicted of burglary. Family members said that Joshua and Judy boasted to them about knowing ways to evade the police, and Joshua made comments about how easy it would be to end someone's life and hide the body. "People don't just disappear, especially when they have a child," Lesser remarked. Court documents stated that Courtney was a loving mother who would never abandon her child. Over the 1.5 years Courtney was not seen outside her home, Joshua and Judy told neighbors and family she was traveling with a boyfriend, an unnamed truck driver nobody met. Sometimes rumors circulated that she had run off with a fiancé. Other times, she was supposedly just inside the house but unavailable for visits. Judy told Lesser that Courtney had been home just a few days before when he knocked on their door in early October. She said Courtney left on foot with her son. When Lesser asked for Judy's phone number, she locked the door in his face, according to court documents. She then reluctantly allowed the police inside to see Courtney's room. "She became very nervous," said Lesser. "The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of items covering all available space on counters," Lesser wrote in the court documents. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress was bare. It appeared as though no one had lived there, Lesser observed. At one point, Judy panicked upon losing sight of one of the detectives behind a closed door. She ordered the investigators to leave when Lesser asked to check the rest of the house for Courtney's child. Later that day, a neighbor told Lesser they saw Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leaving in a van with a child. Detective Lesser also found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic illness, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. She received her last prescription in July 2018, though she had been getting medications every month before disappearing. Despite the gap in medical records, money continued to be withdrawn from Courtney's bank account every month, and her EBT card was used for grocery shopping. Surveillance footage confirmed Joshua and Judy shopping with a small child. Cameras also recorded the couple withdrawing the remaining money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was declared missing in early October. By October 24th, Joshua and Judy had left their home. Lesser wrote that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone when police arrived to execute the search warrant. Mobile numbers associated with Joshua and Judy were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers on the account were activated on the same day with Texas area codes. About a month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called the police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband who had flown in from Texas to check on the property. They said they hadn't seen Courtney for 2 years and that Judy had retired. The man told the police that Joshua and Judy had a child but Judy's daughter stated the child was Courtney's. In mid-December, Lesser traveled to Texas in search of Joshua and Judy. The police found them at Judy's daughter's house, along with Courtney's son. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested on charges of identity theft, interference with custody, and for using Courtney's bank accounts and concealing her child. The child was found safe and was successfully returned to his father. No criminal charges were made against other family members. The police searched Judy's Spokane home with search dogs, but unfortunately found no trace of Courtney. Searches of the home in Texas also yielded no clues to Courtney's whereabouts. Officers also searched a vehicle and trailer owned by Judy, parked at an RV lot in Oklahoma. 40-year-old Joshua and 74-year-old Judy were in jail in Texas, where they declined to be interviewed by the police. They refused to be extradited to Spokane, so the police awaited a governor's warrant for their return. Since the police could not prove their involvement in Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. "This is probably one of the deepest missing person cases," Lesser said about the months-long investigation. "I have 4 notebooks full of different information." Judy and Joshua still claim they have nothing to do with Courtney's disappearance, while the police believe she is likely deceased, but unfortunately cannot yet prove it. Domestic violence experts point out several factors why cases like Courtney Holden's are not always reported. One is the social assumption that someone else will take care of it, according to Morgan Colburn, the Director of Counseling, Advocacy, and Outreach at YWCA. Colburn mentioned that fear of retaliation could also be a factor. And sometimes people see it as a family matter, something that needs to be dealt with at home, he said. Despite the aforementioned charges, Judy and Joshua have not been charged with anything directly related to Courtney's disappearance. Many still believe they know what happened to Courtney. In addition to Joshua's known aggressive behavior, he had also stated he could end someone's life and successfully hide the body from the police. Investigators believe Courtney is deceased, but they have not made any arrests related to her case yet. Summing up today's story, it's heartbreakingly clear that Courtney was unfortunate to become part of the Holden family. And this young girl, who dreamed of family and love, lacked the courage to stand up for herself. She wholeheartedly believed that even these people, who yelled at her, mistreated her, and forced her to work for them, were her family. But should one really need to defend themselves from their own family? It's a profound regret that the bold claims made by Joshua Holden in public about being able to end a life and hide a body cannot be used as evidence of his involvement in Courtney's disappearance. Especially since after that fateful evening, when he forcefully took her back into the house, she was never seen again, and no one knows what she had to endure in those dreadful moments and what atrocities were committed behind closed doors by these monsters who called themselves parents. There are countless ways to discreetly dispose of a body using various chemicals that neither experts can identify nor police dogs can detect. This suggests that if Courtney was harmed that evening, her spirit still lingers in the Holden estate, where she sought a family, but found her demise instead. Her young son was removed from the Holden household and placed under the care of his father, where he remains to this day. Courtney Holden is still listed as missing. If you have any information that could aid the investigation, please contact the Spokane Police Department. The case of Michelle O'Keefe. Who killed the aspiring actress? The judicial system, unfortunately, is not perfect, even in the most developed and democratic countries. Innocent people sometimes end up serving time for crimes they did not commit, a result of investigative errors or other mishaps. Such injustices usually come to light only when the real culprit is found and proven guilty. But what happens when someone convicted of murder is exonerated years later while the real perpetrator remains unpunished because crucial evidence was lost by the police at the time? The case of young American Michelle O'Keefe, killed under mysterious circumstances in the early 2000s, shook the nation. The investigation lasted several years until the main, and essentially the only suspect, was imprisoned for a significant term. It seemed the case was closed, but after 11 years in prison, the convicted person's innocence was proven. Simultaneously, new details emerged, and another suspect appeared, likely the real murderer. However, more than 2 decades since the student's murder, her parents have become disillusioned with justice, losing hope that the person who took their daughter's life will face fair punishment. Let's delve into this story from the beginning and try to understand where the investigation went wrong and whether these errors could have been avoided. Who was Michelle O'Keefe? Michelle Teresa O'Keefe was born on October 11, 1981, in the quiet town of Hanford, California. The eldest of 2 children born to Patricia and Michael O'Keefe, Michelle grew up alongside her younger brother Jason. The O'Keefes were a well-off family, owning a profitable local store. Her parents were committed to ensuring their children received a quality education and could fully realize their talents and potential. Michelle was an exemplary student, excelled in sports and ballroom dancing, and was known for her attractive and artistic demeanor. She dreamed of becoming a famous actress, appearing in films, and conquering Hollywood. She possessed the talent, ambition, and attributes necessary for such a feat. After graduating high school with honors, Michelle easily gained admission to one of California's prestigious colleges. She continued her passion for dancing and took evening acting classes. Michelle actively participated in various events, appeared in commercials, and was often seen as an extra in movie and music video shoots. On her 18th birthday, her loving parents gifted her a luxurious blue Ford Mustang with a new Edge design concept. Michelle had always dreamt of owning this car and was overjoyed to receive it as a present. Unfortunately, it was this striking vehicle that likely drew the attention of her killer, leading to the tragic demise of the young Michelle. The Last Shoot. On February 22, 2000, 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe and her close friend Jennifer Peterson, also an aspiring actress, headed to Palmdale, a scenic town in Los Angeles County, for a video shoot. They were to appear in the latest music video by the popular rock musician Robert James Ritchie, better known by his stage name, Kid Rock. Jennifer and Michelle were extras, dancing and revealing outfits for the video. The shoot consumed nearly the entire day, so by the time they returned to their cars parked at the nearby amusement park, it had almost darkened. Jennifer planned to go home, but Michelle had acting classes that evening. The friends chatted in the parking lot for a few minutes before parting ways. Jennifer walked to her car, while Michelle decided to stay behind to change into her regular clothes. She felt it inappropriate to attend her acting classes in the same outfit she wore for the video shoot, as it was quite provocative. With nowhere private to change on the parking lot, and finding it awkward to do so in her car, Michelle opted to quickly change her clothes right there on the street, next to her car, believing she was alone. This decision, unfortunately, likely proved to be a fatal mistake. Jennifer recalled lingering in the parking lot a while longer, chatting with her boyfriend on the phone. As she started to leave, she noticed the headlights of Michelle's Ford Mustang turning on. Believing Michelle was about to follow her, Jennifer felt reassured that her friend was safe. With loud music playing in her car, the last thing Jennifer saw before turning the corner was what she thought was Michelle's Mustang starting to back out. The murder of an aspiring actress. That evening, a young security guard named Raymond Lee Jennings was on duty at the park and its attractions. Around 9 o'clock, the 25-year-old heard sounds resembling gunshots emanating from the direction of the parking lot, followed by a car alarm. Lacking a firearm and equipped only with a taser, he hesitated to approach alone, knowing he stood little chance against armed assailants. Jennings promptly called his supervisor, Iris Malone, and reported the incident, also alerting the police. Malone arrived within minutes, so before law enforcement reached the scene, she and Jennings decided to cautiously inspect the situation at the parking lot. They immediately noticed a blue car, backed out into the middle lane and halted there with its headlights on and engine running. This was Michelle's Ford Mustang. The car owner was in the driver's seat, motionless and showing no signs of life. Upon closer inspection, Malone and Jennings observed blood inside the car and on Michelle's body, along with several bullet wounds. The driver's door was wide open, and the crime scene appeared horrific. It seemed that Michelle had been chased and initially wounded in the parking lot. She had tried to escape, leapt into her car, and even managed to start it. But the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots, depriving the student of any chance of survival. Michelle's appearance was quite provocative. She had bright makeup and a tousled hairstyle, styled specifically for the video shoot. She was also wearing regular jeans and a shiny top. Apparently, Michelle had partially changed in the parking lot, as a shiny mini skirt matching the top, and a regular t-shirt were found next to her on the passenger seat. One of her shoes was on her foot, while the other lay away on the parking lot, presumably dropped as she dashed to her car. Crime scene investigation. Following the security guard and his supervisor, the first to arrive at the crime scene was the local sheriff's deputy. He noted that the young woman showed no signs of life, but he informed emergency services in case he was mistaken and she still had a chance of being saved. He also recorded the statements of Jennings and Malone. The arriving police officers began a thorough examination of the crime scene, gathering all possible evidence. They found several shell casings on the parking lot and noticed a bullet mark on the asphalt, slightly away from the car. This led to the conclusion that the perpetrator likely first fired a shot into the ground to intimidate the victim, then shot at her directly, as evidenced by bloodstains on the parking lot. The victim had run towards her car but didn't manage to escape, as the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots. She died almost instantly from extensive injuries and significant blood loss. In total, 5 shell casings were found on the ground. Experts concluded that all shots were fired from the same weapon, but the bullets significantly differed from each other, raising questions that needed prompt answers. Also found on the ground was an earring, presumably dropped by the victim. Later, her friend identified this item, confirming it belonged to Michelle. However, the second earring was not found on or near the victim. This detail, unfortunately, was initially deemed insignificant and was forgotten for a long time, which turned out to be a crucial oversight. Theories and speculations initially, close relatives and friends of the murdered young woman were interviewed. They unanimously asserted that Michelle had no enemies or ill-wishers. Known for her sociable, open, and very friendly nature, everyone who knew her spoke highly of the student. Thus, a personal motive for the murder was almost immediately ruled out. The next theory considered was an unsuccessful robbery or carjacking attempt of her new vehicle. However, this seemed doubtful. The only personal item missing was her mobile phone, which she had used just minutes before the attack to tell her mother that the filming was over and she was heading back. Michelle's purse, containing her wallet and a couple of $100 in cash, was found at the passenger's feet. Police speculated that in the confusion and darkness, the assailant might have failed to notice the purse, and fearing the gunshot sounds had attracted security, didn't search the car. This could also explain why the carjacking attempt was aborted. It seemed the attacker initially did not intend to shoot, but only to threaten her with the weapon, but something went wrong. Another theory proposed that Michelle might have been mistaken for a lady of the night due to her appearance. She was dressed provocatively, with heavy makeup and high heels. It was possible the criminal noticed her on her way to the parking lot and followed her. In the darkness, he might have approached her with ill intentions, but upon being firmly rejected, he took her life in retaliation. Supporting this theory was the fact that her top was partially pulled down, exposing her left breast. This suggested that the attacker was likely a man. However, it was also possible that her thin, strapped clothing slipped during the scuffle, chase, or as the frightened, wounded young woman attempted to get into her car. The sole suspect. The first person interrogated was Raymond, the security guard on duty at the parking lot, who was believed to be the sole witness of the incident. He confirmed hearing gunshots and a car alarm around 9 in the evening, immediately reporting it to his supervisor and calling the police. Raymond noted he saw no one on the parking lot before or after the shots. No one fled or left the scene in the minutes following. Given that the time was still early and the area was popular, it's plausible that others nearby might have seen or heard something. Police became interested in Raymond's background and discovered that, despite his relatively young age, he was the head of a large family, raising 5 children. He served in the California National Guard and aspired to be a law enforcer, working while also studying at the police academy, gaining certain knowledge and skills. As the main witness to the murder, Raymond sought to help the investigation, naively thinking that this experience would be beneficial for his academy exams. When investigators asked him to present his version of events during an interrogation, Raymond detailed his perspective on how things might have unfolded. Being a top student, he meticulously considered all details, trying to piece together a coherent picture. He hypothesized where the attacker and victim might have been during the initial gunshot and how subsequent events unfolded. He based his story on the evidence, the location of shell casings, blood droplets, the victim's belongings, and the car. He also estimated the shooting distances. At that time, Raymond didn't realize that he was unwittingly digging his own grave. He just wanted to assist the investigation and be useful. However, the detectives investigating the case drew their own conclusions, suggesting that such detailed knowledge could only be possessed by the murderer himself. Since there were no other suspects, the security guard was charged with the girl's murder. New witnesses. Several weeks after Michelle's murder, a 17-year-old African-American girl named Victoria Richardson came to the police's attention. She had been in the parking lot on that tragic evening with her 18-year-old boyfriend and a couple of friends. They had been horseback riding in the park and returned to the parking lot after dark on February 22nd. According to Victoria, they were in their car, music blaring, preparing to leave when they heard unusual sounds. Initially, they mistook them for firecrackers or fireworks, paying little attention, but then realized they were gunshots. Victoria recalled seeing, just a minute and a half earlier, a man in a security guard's uniform walking towards a parked blue Ford Mustang nearby. After the strange sounds and the activation of a car alarm, the friends got out of their car and saw the Mustang, which had rolled backwards and stopped, no longer moving. Reportedly, they saw the security guard again, who warned them of an armed person on the parking lot and advised caution. Hearing this, the group hurried back into their car and cautiously left the parking lot, trying not to draw attention. When asked to describe the guard they interacted with, Victoria mentioned he was a middle-aged, heavy-set African-American man. This description matched another employee who had worked in the parking lot the day before Raymond's shift. This second guard was immediately detained and questioned. He had a solid alibi as he was at a family gathering at the time of the murder, confirmed by about 20 people. Therefore, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' accounts, Jennings remained the sole suspect. Prolonged investigation and arrest. After 5 years, the investigation insisted that Raymond was the killer, partly because his knowledge and skills in forensics could convincingly deflect suspicion away from himself. However, evidence and witness testimonies didn't align coherently. The crime itself appeared irrational and odd, with no apparent motive for the suspect. Raymond had his own legally acquired pistol, which wasn't with him on the night of the murder. He presented this weapon to the police, and forensic analysis confirmed that the bullets weren't fired from it. Investigators speculated that he might have hidden unregistered firearms, but this theory was unsubstantiated. Meanwhile, the murdered girl's parents conducted their own investigation, hiring private detectives. Patricia and Michael felt the law enforcement was inadequately handling the case or simply inactive. They actively engaged in interviews and TV appearances, sharing their story to pressure the authorities. They were convinced that Raymond was responsible for Michelle's death and should be punished. Although there were no strong reasons to detain him initially, Raymond went to Iraq for military service, where he stayed for almost 5 years. Upon returning to the United States, he was immediately arrested and jailed. Raymond consented to a polygraph test but failed, which worked against him. Unable to post the $1 million bail set, he had to remain in custody for about a year while investigators and his defense prepared for trial. Trial and verdict. According to the prosecution, the security guard, Raymond, mistook Michelle in her revealing outfit for a sex worker and followed her to her car. After she rebuffed his advances, a scorned Raymond opened fire and then radioed his boss about the incident, stating he wouldn't approach the crime scene. The defense highlighted that the murder weapon was never found, either on the day or later. There were no DNA traces, fingerprints, or any signs of Raymond's presence at the crime scene. Interestingly, epithelial particles under the victim's nails did not match Raymond's DNA. Instead of probing whose DNA it was, the investigators convinced the court it was incidental contamination unrelated to the case. Raymond's personal belongings, car, locker, and home were thoroughly searched for the murder weapon, but a gunpowder residue test on his clothing was strangely not conducted at the time. Notably, Raymond resigned a few days after the incident due to threats from unknown individuals and returned his work uniform, which police received only a week later. It was claimed that he had thoroughly washed the uniform before returning it, thus erasing any gunpowder traces. However, traces of sweat and dust on the uniform indicated it hadn't been washed. Victoria Richardson, the aforementioned witness, testified in court, stating she saw a guard at the parking lot during the shooting. But she didn't specify who she saw, citing darkness and possible confusion. The prosecution seized upon her testimony as evidence of Raymond's guilt. The jury deliberated for a week but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. As a result, a new trial was scheduled to give both sides time to prepare. In February 2009, 11 out of 12 jurors found Raymond guilty of murder. In December 2009, the Supreme Court convicted Raymond Jennings of murder under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Raymond maintained his innocence, asserting in his final statement that he had no remorse since he didn't commit the crime. However, Michelle's parents and brother were convinced of his guilt and satisfied with the verdict. New trial and acquittal. Raymond Jennings spent nearly 11 years incarcerated, losing hope in justice as his appeals were repeatedly denied. However, in late 2015, renowned attorney Jeffrey Ehrlich and his son Clinton, a law student at the time, took interest in his case. They revisited the case files and found numerous errors, inconsistencies, and blatant violations in the evidence and trial proceedings. The Ehrlichs believed Raymond was wrongfully convicted and set out to prove his innocence. They compiled all evidence and appealed to the department responsible for reviewing convictions. Specifically, they pointed out that Raymond's uniform showed no gunpowder residue or blood splatter, only sweat and dust, indicating it wasn't washed. Additionally, they noted that Raymond was unarmed, and detectives failed to consider other individuals present at the park that evening. New reports suggested the murder was a spontaneous act, likely a botched robbery attempt. Moreover, Victoria Richardson, the main witness, and her boyfriend, both with a criminal history, were serving time for armed robbery at the time of the final trial, but were never considered suspects. The mix of different cartridges fired from the same gun, unusual for someone with military training, hinted at a street gang style. Richardson and her boyfriend were part of such a gang, but since they weren't initially investigated for Michelle's murder, many leads were irretrievably lost. Notably, the boyfriend wore an earring resembling the one found at the crime scene on the night of the murder. Despite failing to prove the criminal couple's involvement in the aspiring actress's murder, the Ehrlichs successfully established Jennings's innocence. Consequently, the former guard was factually acquitted, a significant distinction from legal or presumptive innocence. Sergeant Raymond Jennings was released from prison after nearly 11 years for a crime he didn't commit. The judge noted that jurors weren't informed about the presence of gang members at the crime scene that evening. In March 2017, Jennings received a $500,000 compensation for the wrongful conviction. A devout man, he later stated that God had heard his prayers and justice had prevailed. Only Michelle O'Keefe's parents remained deeply upset, believing the man they thought killed their daughter was wrongly freed. Having also lost their son in a car accident, the O'Keefes divorced, clinging to the belief that their daughter's supposed killer had been punished. Despite the case remaining unsolved, the likelihood of anyone being held accountable for Michelle's murder is now extremely low.